The last thing I remember is the searing pain of betrayal. Is this my reward? I coughed, the words tasting of blood and irony. The man I once trusted, Count Brandenburg, stood over me, spewing some pathetic eulogy about my sacrifice for the Empire. He could stop the bullshit. I was summoned to this world, fought their wars, killed their demon lord, and this is how they repay their hero. Even in my past life in the military, I'd never seen such a cowardly betrayal. Then, against all odds, I heard voices. 4 years have passed since my death. I spent them trapped in the weak, clumsy body of a child. Even something as simple as reading is a struggle. It's a strange fate, to be sure. I was reborn as the son of the continent's most feared necromancer, the Black Duke. A reincarnation stone I'd found in my past life activated upon my death, preserving my mind and memories. This wasn't just a second life, this was an opportunity. I will master the dark arts of this house. My new father, Duke Jackson, is a man feared by the entire continent. He called me to his study, his voice as cold as a tombstone. An instructor from the Blue Magic Tower was there to report on my progress. She told him that the moment I was taught about mana, I engraved my first magic circle, but she saw more than just talent for magic. She saw my talent for killing. My father decided to test my aptitude for our family's art, necromancy. He told me to control my mind, as if I were some simple child. I began the ritual on a dead rabbit, just as he instructed. But why settle for simple reanimation? He seemed unimpressed with the result. He thought the test was over, dismissing the creature into the woods. He was about to write off my instructor's report as an exaggeration. I let a small smirk cross my face as I activated the real spell. The rabbit detonated in a violent explosion of ice. His eyes went wide with shock, realizing I had fused necromancy with elemental magic to create a living bomb. In that moment, he saw not a son, but a weapon that would change the world. Years passed, and my power grew exponentially. I found myself in a dungeon, watching some orcs toy with their prey. A pathetic adventurer was pinned, moments from a useless death. He was weeping, begging for his life. Suddenly, his eyes darted past the monsters. The orcs turned, just as their leader's head vanished in a spray of gore. I moved between them, my dark magic tearing them to shreds before they could even scream. The so-called adventurer could only stare, covered in the filth of the creatures that nearly killed him. I offered him a hand, playing the part of a savior, but his eyes were fixed on the horde of monsters, still deeper in the cave. He started to panic, but I had already grown bored of this game. It was time to end this all at once. Finally, the day I had been waiting for arrived. A young woman from a famous family of knights challenged me, seeking to prove her worth. She wanted the approval of one man in particular, the holy swordsman, Count Brandenburg, the man responsible for my death. He was finally here. After all these years of waiting, the real hunt was about to begin. A few days later, my new master decided it was time for a field lesson in the desolate northern plains. Her first brilliant test for a mind like mine was to hunt a rabbit. Recall the times you went hunting with your father, she instructed, as if my past held any value beyond the power I could extract from it. I didn't need nostalgia. I needed only a target, and with a flick of my wrist, I turned the insignificant creature into a monument of frozen obliteration. She looked at my work with a pensive expression, noting that even the same spell varies infinitely from one mage to another. It's because one's magic is a mirror reflecting their mind, she explained, as if this were some grand revelation. I listened to her lecture with feigned interest, absorbing the theory behind the craft. She prattled on about the Red Magic Tower valuing strength and order through aggressive fire magic. Then she mentioned the Blue Magic Tower and their naive obsession with harmony in their water spells. Each tower, she said, projects its flawed philosophy onto its magic, creating a foundation for its system. She gave me a slight condescending smile, pleased with her own lecture. But I guess that is still too early of a topic for you, she concluded, dismissing my potential just as everyone else had. We moved on to necromancy, and she demonstrated the most basic form, raising a zombie from the rabbit's mangled corpse. I extended my own hand, feeling the familiar cold embrace of dark mana answer my call. The pathetic creature's remains were instantly saturated with my power, its form twisting under the necrotic influence. She explained the theory of mana strings, puppeteering the dead by linking to the head, spine, and knees. I had it mastered before she finished the sentence, the rabbit rising as my perfect, undead servant. Can you move on to the next one right away? She asked, a hint of surprise in her voice. I simply replied, yes, master. Without a moment's hesitation, I unleashed a torrent of frigid energy, encasing my new puppet in a shell of jagged ice with the frozen armor spell. The zombie rabbit now looked like a demonic winter beast, its dead eyes glowing from within the crystalline shell. Let's test its defense, she challenged, a playful smirk on her face as she prepared a bolt of her own magic. The armor shattered but held, perfectly deflecting her attack. A genuine smile touched my lips, a rare flicker of childish pride. She praised my excellent work, but I could tell she was merely humoring me. Sensing my ambition, she asked if there was something I wanted. I met her gaze directly and made my request. I'd like for you to instruct me on how I can better utilize water attribute magic too. Her answer was a single crushing word, no. My smile vanished. She dismissed my achievement, stating that what I performed was a very basic form of water magic. She began a new lecture, this time on how water magic requires a level of insight far beyond a simple beginner. Most mages, she claimed, find learning even one type of magic to be an immense challenge. To handle two simultaneously is to be a dual mage, a title reserved for the truly gifted. At your age, she declared with absolute certainty, it's nearly impossible. She stood there, arms crossed, judging me with that same look of underestimation I've grown to despise. Excessive ambition, she called it. I looked up, my patience wearing thin. Pardon? After everything I've shown, you still think it's not enough? I pressed, reminding her of her own promise that we would find our path forward together. Flustered and unable to counter my logic, she abruptly declared that the lesson was over for the day. That night, I went to the study, determined to carve my own path. I would prove myself so completely that she would be left with no choice but to teach me. I devoured entire volumes of arcane knowledge, my mana responding and evolving with every page turned. The next day, she found me looking exhausted. Are you all right? She asked, feigning concern. I stayed up for a bit to prepare something, I replied, ignoring her pity. A confident smirk spread across my face as I stood ready. Yes, master! I unleashed my power, a swirling vortex of dark necromancy and crystalline ice. Before her stood my creation, a grotesque beast of ice and bone that made my previous attempts look like child's play. She was stunned into silence, but I was just getting started. With a thought, I triggered the armor, and it detonated outwards in a violent ice explosion, a technique she thought was beyond me. And that wasn't all. The exposed corpse began to glow, concentrating all its dark energy into a single volatile orb. I gave the final command. The subsequent explosion was a maelstrom of necrotic force and razor-sharp ice shards, a perfect fusion of death and winter. And as the chaos threatened to consume her, I erected a flawless barrier of hexagonal shields, freezing the scene in a moment of absolute power. She stared at me, trapped and speechless. From within my perfect cage, corpse explosion and ice explosion, I explained calmly, holding the raw elements in my hands. I combined both water and dark attributes into one. With a cold, triumphant smile, I posed the question that would shatter her worldview. Could I count as a dual mage with this much? The elf Sophia could only stare, her perfectly composed face finally cracking as she maintained the barrier, an attack method she'd never seen before. She muttered, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear. She was right to be shocked. This wasn't in any of her precious textbooks. By combining the kinetic force of a corpse explosion with the piercing power of my ice magic, the blast radius became exponentially larger. This wasn't the elegant magic of scholars. It was the brutal, efficient magic of a killer. She looked at me then, wondering what kind of mind could conceive of such a thing at my age. Let her wonder. My mind is a weapon she could never hope to understand. Her musings were interrupted by an approaching presence. I put on my best childish smile and waved, calling out to the man in dark armor. Uncle Helmet. The knight on the warhorse Helmet smiled warmly, his voice booming across the snow. Young master, Lady Sophia. He waved back, a gesture far too casual for a man of his station. I ran up, playing the part of the inquisitive child perfectly. Have you just come back from raiding another dungeon? He chuckled, explaining they had just subdued a small group of monsters nearby. It was an excuse for the Black Cavalry to get some exercise, nothing more. I glanced back at the silent, imposing figures behind him. The Black Cavalry, the elite knights of the Dukedom of Saxon, wielding lances wreathed in aura. They were an unrivaled force on the battlefield, a testament to my family's power, and their knight captain Sir Helmet was a name known across the lands. He is one of the continent's 7 swordmasters, a living legend draped in black steel and shadow, a perfect tool for me to sharpen my own skills against. I looked up at him with manufactured innocence, my voice laced with eagerness. You haven't forgotten about our promise of teaching me sword techniques, right? An opportunity to learn from a man of his status was something I would never pass up. He laughed, his guard completely down. I gave him one last wave as he turned to leave. I'll see you later then, Uncle Helmet. He rode off with his knights, calling back a warning about the cold. Pointless advice for someone who commands the ice itself. Sophia watched them go before turning to me. Let us return now. All right, master, I replied, the picture of obedience. That night, Sophia gave her report to my parents. She poured the tea, her hands steady despite the bomb she was about to drop. She spoke of my progress, her voice echoing in the grand chamber. Young Master Dale has mastered his first circle in necromancy and water magic, she announced. My father's expression immediately hardened. What we requested you to teach him was just water magic, he finished, his tone laced with cold disappointment. Sophia met his gaze, unflinching. However, as his mentor, I wanted to teach him whatever he wished to learn, she explained, justifying her little act of rebellion. She was playing a dangerous game, appealing to my own desires over my father's direct orders. My mother intervened, her voice soft but firm. If Dale wishes it, may I request that you keep teaching him water magic? Sophia bowed her head slightly. Of course, I'll be taking care of him from now on too, she added, a promise to them both. My father simply replied, please do. She then turned directly to him, a flicker of guilt in her eyes. I sincerely apologize for breaking my promise with you, Lord Noir, she said, her formal apology hanging in the air. A calculated risk on her part, but one that seemed to pay off. Once she was gone, my mother let out a breath she'd been holding. Our child sure is extraordinary, isn't he? She said, a mix of pride and anxiety in her voice. My father clasped his hands, his expression unreadable. I can't believe he became a dual mage at the age of 8. Though he does scare me from time to time, my mother admitted. He has to be capable of that much since he's our child. My father remained silent for a long moment before looking at her. Elena, "I'd like to teach Dale necromancy," he stated, the words dropping like stones into a silent pond. My mother's eyes widened in shock. His ambition was finally showing itself. He wanted to give me the strength to bear the duties of a lord. But more than that, he wanted a worthy disciple, an heir to his true legacy. He saw my potential not as a threat but as an opportunity. As a father, he wanted his son to inherit his power. He looked down, his voice heavy with regret. "I'm so sorry, Elena." He knew the burden he was placing on me, on our family. "The public's perception of necromancy is still poor. People fear it and call it the magic of death," he continued, laying bare the cruel reality of our world. My mother looked at him, her expression softening. "That's why I want to dissuade you, but," she leaned in, her voice a determined whisper, "train him to become a necromancer who could ignore others' perception of necromancy." She placed her hands over his, a silent vow passing between them. He looked at her, stunned. "Okay, I understand, Elena," he finally said, his voice thick with emotion. He pulled her into an embrace, a silent promise made. "I swear on everything I hold dear that I will train our son to become the best." And so my real training began. His first words to me were not of praise. "I'm very disappointed in you, Dale. You've been reviving lives without even knowing what you were controlling?" he asked, his tone dripping with scorn. His disappointment was a physical weight in the air. I offered a weak defense. "That's all Master taught me. I can't do anything about it." He led me down into the castle's secret underbelly, to his personal magic workshop. The moment I demonstrated the crude necromancy Cephia had taught me, he clicked his tongue in disgust and brought me here. "As long as I'm teaching you," he declared, his voice echoing in the dark room, "don't even think about using such a basic necromancy spell." His finger pointed at a mountain of books. "You'll begin with memorizing the bone and muscle structures of all life forms," he commanded. "Do you understand?" Stacks of books taller than I was were piled before me. I had no choice. "Yes, Father." The books he gave me were medical textbooks from my previous world, filled with complex diagrams and anatomical charts. I devoured every single letter, absorbing the knowledge at an inhuman rate. Finally, he returned, taking the last book from my hands. "You've completed the basics, Dale." With that, I was finally allowed to move on to practical magic. A predatory smile crept onto his face. "We'll begin the real class now." "Okay, Father," I said, my own anticipation building. My eyes widened slightly. He pulled the sheet off a stone altar, revealing the subject of my first lesson. It was a goblin's corpse, pale and still. "You seem quite perplexed," my father noted, amused by my reaction. "An untrained warlock can only make a corpse move like a zombie," he lectured, his voice laced with contempt for amateurs. "On the other hand, a skilled one can make a death knight out of an ordinary soldier." He gestured to the body. "In front of you is an ordinary undead soldier." He spread his hand, a silent challenge. "How will you move it?" I focused, letting my mana flow into the corpse. I could feel every fiber of its being under my control. A goblin was far more complex than the rabbits I'd practiced on before. Controlling a bipedal creature required countless intricate mana strings. I shot my mana into its muscles, trying a new tactic. My threads of power sunk into the dead flesh. I tried to control it like a complex puppet, a marionette of death. It was a mistake. Was it a mistake to use post-mortem rigidity to increase its defense? I thought, gritting my teeth. Its joints and muscles have stiffened, and now I can't move them at all. I struggled against the self-inflicted paralysis, my control slipping. His voice cut through my panic. "Dale." Though it was a good idea to harden its body by accelerating post-mortem rigidity, he began, his hand on my shoulder. "The side effect is that it limits the movement of the corpse." He was standing behind me, his presence overwhelming. His eyes glowed with purple energy. "Watch." Dark mana exploded from him, a vortex of pure power. The goblin corpse was lifted into the air, caught in a terrifying storm of his magic. I could only stare in shock as he began to deconstruct it from the inside out. The goblin was suspended in the center of his power. Tendrils of dark energy pulsed and writhed around the corpse. "Rib cages are originally meant for protecting one's internal organs," he explained, his voice calm amidst the chaos. The creature's chest cavity began to glow ominously. "But there's no need for the dead to protect organs that no longer function, is there?" With a sickening crunch, the goblin's ribs burst outward from its chest. They elongated and sharpened, forming a set of vicious bone claws. He had weaponized the creature's own skeleton. "Understand your target's structure and alter them to your needs," he said, his eyes glinting in the dark. This was true necromancy. I was utterly speechless. "That is the foundation of black magic." He stood beside me, his creation kneeling obediently at his feet. I finally found my voice. "Father, teach me the mindset of the Noir Magic Tower." A slow, satisfied smile spread across his face. He had been waiting for me to ask. "The truth?" he asked, turning to face me fully. He looked down at me, his student, his son. He knelt, placing a hand on my shoulder, his expression deadly serious. "The truth always exists within death. Therefore, we must understand the weight of life to reach the truth." His words echoed in my mind, resonating with a part of me I kept buried. A memory, sharp and unwanted, clawed its way to the surface. The crackling of fire, the smell of blood, my past self, clad in the armor of a so-called hero. A man groveling at my feet, begging for his life.
Please spare me.
I beg you, hero, he cried, his voice pathetic. I stood over him, my sword gleaming in the moonlight. A silent judge. I raised my blade, his pleas meaning nothing to me. He saw the intent in my eyes, his begging turning to a final desperate scream. Please, don't key. The memory of the impact, the severing of life, was as clear as yesterday. I brought the sword down without a shred of hesitation. Dale, my father's voice pulled me from the bloody vision. Are you all right? I flinched, my face pale. The past felt so real, so close. I shoved the memory back into its cage, forcing composure onto my face. I met his gaze. I'm fine, father. I am fine, father. My aptitude for the arcane arts was becoming a problem for the established order, and so the rumors my father so carefully cultivated began to spread. Whispers of a duke teaching his heir forbidden black magic, a flagrant violation of the continent's most sacred covenant. The eyes of the empire, those parasitic nobles and their sniveling emperor, turned towards me, their gazes filled with a mixture of fear and contempt. Let them watch. Their scrutiny was meaningless, a distraction from the true work that needed to be done on the ducal training grounds. Weeks blurred into a routine of relentless, punishing training. I met the weight of my instructor's sword, the force rattling up my arm. Helmet, one of the famed 7 swords of the continent, seemed amused by my tenacity. He brought his full weight to bear, swinging the heavy wooden practice sword with enough force to shatter stone. But force without precision is just noise. I twisted, redirecting his momentum with a perfectly timed counter that sent a shockwave through the dirt. His eyes widened for a fraction of a second, a flicker of genuine surprise. The master swordsman stumbled backward, his weapon slipping from his grasp and clattering to the ground. He quickly masked his shock with a booming laugh, declaring my performance impressive. I kept my eyes on him, my own voice flat and cold. He shook his head, insisting he was using practical techniques that would have killed any normal opponent instantly. He told me my skill with a blade was exceptional, a supposed shame for a mage who should be relying on guards and defensive spells. His logic was typical of a warrior, sound on the surface but fundamentally flawed. He couldn't comprehend why I would push myself this hard, asking if I had a particular reason. Of course I had a reason. I glanced down at my bandaged hand, the skin raw from the constant friction. It would be pathetic, I stated, if the son of Duke Saxon had to rely on others to survive. I then added a bit of calculated flattery, explaining that the chance to learn from one of the 7 swords was an opportunity I could never pass up. His ego swelled, and he laughed, declaring he would be proud to have a son like me. Just as his praise settled in the air, a new voice cut through. You two certainly seem to be in high spirits. It was my mother, and I turned to greet her. She said she came to see my progress, but also had some news to share. She brought up a birthday present I had once asked for, something my mind focused on far greater things, had long since forgotten. A memory surfaced of me as a much younger child, telling my parents that what I truly wanted was a little sister. With a gentle smile, she rested a hand on her stomach, confirming the impossible. I would have to take good care of her, and I found myself promising that I would. 10 months later, the promise became a reality. Looking at this tiny, fragile creature, I found her to be. My mother offered, asking if I wanted to hold her, and I felt a strange hesitation. As I took her in my arms, my mother noted how my sister was perfectly calm with me, unlike the fuss she'd made when our father held her. She was impossibly light, yet holding her felt like I was bearing an immense weight. I told my father as much, and he looked at me with a knowing gaze. A faint smile touched his lips. That, he said, his voice low and serious, is the weight of a life. Never forget it. But the moment passed as quickly as it came, and he reminded me it was time for my magic lesson. My tutor, the elf Miss Sophia, was waiting for me in the snow, announcing that today we would engage in practical sparring. When I asked if I could truly attack her, she gave a confident smirk and told me to come at her with everything I have. A foolish invitation. As she gathered her own mana, I decided to test her defenses. I unleashed a volley of simple ice shards, a rudimentary attack by my standards. She shattered them with contemptuous ease, her expression bored as she muttered, "Too slow." Her eyes then narrowed with irritation. How dare a student go easy on their master? A shard of ice materialized in her hand, radiating a chilling power. "Raise your barrier," she commanded, her tone leaving no room for argument. She unleashed a torrent of magic far faster and more powerful than I anticipated. The blast struck my arm with concussive force. If I hadn't instinctively cast ice armor in that split second, the injury would have been severe. She seemed impressed by my quick reaction, a smug little smile playing on her lips as she told me to try again. A direct assault was pointless. I needed to control the battlefield. I slammed my palms to the frozen ground, weaving a complex formula and commanding a massive wall of ice to rise. She looked genuinely surprised, clearly not expecting a defensive maneuver. Her brow furrowed as she tried to understand my strategy. She correctly deduced the formula I used to reinforce the ice, making it as dense as steel. She walked toward the wall, her guard lowered. She placed a hand against its surface, likely assuming I was simply trying to recover my strength, a fatal miscalculation. While she was busy pondering my motives, I was activating the second part of the spell. The wall was never a shield, it was a bomb. Her eyes widened in horror as the structure began to glow with an ominous blue light. She realized my true intention a moment too late. The wall detonated, turning into a deadly storm of razor-sharp shrapnel. The ice shattered with a satisfying crack, just as I had calculated. A perfect detonation. It worked. The incantation was simple enough. Condense the mana within the ice wall to its absolute limit, then release it all at once. By strengthening the molecular bonds before compression, I turned a simple defensive spell into a crude but effective grenade. It'll be hard to avoid this one, Master, I state to the empty air, knowing full well she's listening. I feign a moment of panic, my voice laced with false concern as I see her spectral form manifest from the shadows. You called, she asks, her voice calm, completely unfazed by my little trap. I put on a convincing display of relief, though I knew exactly what she was doing. An illusion, a decent one, for her level. She gives a wry smile, recognizing the technique. I never thought a mere illusion would be capable of wounding an elder of the magic tower. I lower my head, feigning remorse. I never meant to hurt you, Master. I know, she says, her expression softening. In fact, I'm grateful. It means you trusted me enough to use your full strength. She kneels down, her words dripping with pride. As your master, that makes me prouder than words can express. You're an excellent student. She ruffles my hair, and I allow it, playing the part of the talented, eager child. It's all thanks to what you taught me. I watch her fall silent, processing the rapid pace of my growth. Later in my father's study, he notices the faint scratch on her cheek. Why do you have that wound? His formula was extraordinarily sharp, she explains, covering for my supposed carelessness. My father simply nods, his mind clearly elsewhere. She continues her report, framing my progress as a joy to witness. Then she pivots. If it's okay, may I make one more request? Please, go ahead, my father says, his attention now fully on her. She reports an orc incursion into our territory, a minor threat, but a perfect opportunity. However, my father states, his gaze unblinking, I intend to send Dale into this battle. Sophia's composure breaks. Master Dale isn't ready yet. He won't be expected to fight on the front lines, my father clarifies, his tone leaving no room for argument. He stands, his presence filling the room. Nonetheless, defending the territory is the duty of House Saxon. His dark mana flares around him. As the Duke's heir, he must understand that responsibility. Dale is no exception. Sophia relents, seeing the futility of arguing. I'll be entrusting Dale with my artifact. He looks at her, his expression a mask of cold authority. I want you to guide him, Sophia, until he learns to control its power, he finishes, completely oblivious to the fact that I've already surpassed their understanding of control. This is the moment I've been maneuvering towards. These artifacts are objects imbued with immense power, demanding a steep price from their wielder. They feed on mana, or life force itself, becoming more uncontrollable as their power grows. For the weak, they are a death sentence. But for me, they are simply tools. We arrive before the family vault. My father formally announces my participation. I inject false excitement into my voice. Finally, a battle. Sophia watches with a worried expression as he confirms my role in the subjugation force. Before that, however, he says, turning towards the vault doors, you must first learn how to control the power of darkness that our family wields. The doors open, and I feign childish awe at the collection within. Behold, he declares, these are the Demon King artifacts our ancestors claimed. He warns me not to compare them to ordinary trinkets. A foolish statement. I already know their true worth. I can feel the intense mana radiating from them, I say, playing my part perfectly. Exactly, he agrees. They all contain immense power and are extremely dangerous. Do not touch anything recklessly. Too late. I've already slipped away while he was monologuing. I move through the aisles, searching for an artifact that resonates with my purpose. A whisper echoes in my mind from a nearby shield, sensing the deep-seated hatred I carry. Suddenly they are all screaming at me. These dark artifacts, begging to be chosen, drawn to the abyss within my soul. They are resonating with my lingering resentment. But this is all just noise. I need something far stronger than these desperate relics. Then I see it displayed inconspicuously amongst the others. A simple hooded cloak. How did this get here? This is a shadow cloak. This is the top-grade artifact used by Duke Berta of the Demon King's army. It grants its user the ability to give form to shadows, a power that makes its wielder an impossibly difficult opponent. I don't hesitate. I reach out and put it on. My father and Sophia finally notice I'm gone, calling my name in a panic. The moment the fabric touches my skin, a primal voice fills my mind, whispering a single ravenous thought. I'm hungry. My body is instantly pulled into a swirling vortex of shadow. This is no ordinary enchantment. The cloak contains a sentient shadow creature, a being that can move darkness as if it were a living thing. And to control this power, the host must make the creature submit completely. A trivial task. The shadow manifests before me, a formless beast of pure instinct. So it won't yield easily, huh? It lunges, jaws of darkness snapping shut, attempting to devour my consciousness. The pressure is immense, enough to shatter the mind of an ordinary man. From the outside, they can only watch as I'm consumed by a sphere of pure darkness. If this continues, he'll lose his sanity and be devoured by the shadow creature, my father says, his voice tight with a rare hint of worry. He prepares to intervene. We'll have to pull him out by force. But before he can move, the darkness recedes. I step out of the dissipating shadow, the cloak settled calmly on my shoulders. Dale? He asks, stunned. Yes, father. The creature within is now silent, utterly and completely mine. Sophia rushes to my side, her face pale with fear. I'm fine, master, I say with a placid smile. You had me worried. They stare, dumbfounded. They cannot comprehend how a child could endure and tame such a malevolent artifact unscathed. I turn to my father, my face a mask of innocence. Father, I have a question. He simply stares back, still processing what he just witnessed. Speak. I give him my most brilliant, childlike smile. Can I try on the others too? The look of sheer, unadulterated shock on their faces is a reward in itself. After a long pause, he finally grunts. Go ahead then. Thank you so much, I say, already moving to the next display. It took all day and night, but I familiarized myself with every single tool in their pathetic collection. The day of the subjugation finally arrives. I say my farewells to my mother. Another piece to be moved on the board. I'll be back soon, I promise. Before turning my horse toward the encampment, the troops are assembled and ready. My father addresses the captain, then turns to me. Dale, he says, his voice carrying across the cold air. Give the order to march in my stead. I feign a moment of surprise. The pride of our house, the Black Cavalry, will one day be the force you command, he declares. This time I will command them to victory, not to their graves. The time for departure has come. I raise my arm, my voice clear and cold. Let us go, proud blades of House Saxon. The knights roar their approval, their devotion easily won. The plan is simple. Our 250 cavalrymen will reinforce the Winter Wardens to face 1,000 orcs. We'll launch a surprise attack by crossing the Saxon River downstream. Sophia steps forward, her duty clear. Please step aside. I will create the bridge of ice. I give her a nod of acknowledgement. It must have been difficult for you, following the doctrine of nonviolence, to come all this way. In an instant, a massive bridge of solid ice spans the churning river. You may cross now, she says. Thank you as always, Lady Sophia, my father says, with a formal bow. I give her a small smile as I pass. Teacher, I'll be going now. She watches me ride away, a strange look on her face. How strange, she murmurs to herself, lost in thought. To think I have a disciple who worries about his master this much. Her misunderstanding is, the orc encampment was nestled perfectly within the canyon, a natural kill box laid out just for me. My ranger unit, the so-called Winter Watchmen, had been lying in ambush for hours, awaiting my signal. On my command, they let loose the first volley, a rain of fire to herald the beginning of the end. The night sky bled fire as arrows descended upon the unsuspecting brutes, turning their camp into a chaotic inferno. Tents burned and flesh sizzled, the ground littered with the pincushion bodies of their dead. One survivor, riddled with shafts, let out a pathetic gurgle before the flames consumed it. With the enemy in disarray, I gave the order for the second phase, a full cavalry charge in a wedge formation, to shatter what was left of them. The ground itself shook as the armored tide of my family's knights thundered down into the valley. My father's aide, ever the sycophant, turned to me from our clifftop vantage point, asking for my assessment. I indulged him, explaining the simple physics of the charge, the momentum generated by an armored knight moving at over 40 kilometers per hour. When you combine that raw force with the knight's own aura, not even an orc's tough hide could offer any meaningful resistance. It was a simple equation for annihilation. Yes, he fawned. This is the power of our ducal house's cavalry. He stated the obvious as if it were a profound revelation. My father, ever the pragmatist, warned me not to let my guard down, reminding me that this was only the beginning. The surviving orcs, bless their primitive hearts, actually tried to form a shield wall. Our knights crashed into them like a tidal wave against sand, though the commander correctly noted that a full rout would require successive charges. The retreat signal, a bright blue flare, shot into the sky, marking the end of the first wave. The disciplined cavalry began to pull back, disengaging to regroup for the next assault. The orcs, in their boundless stupidity, seemed to believe they had actually won the engagement. Their momentary confusion quickly boiled over into primal, thoughtless rage. But one knight, a straggler from a lesser house, was caught by the beasts when his mount stumbled. I watched impassively as their crude spears found their mark. Bad luck, I stated, my voice devoid of any emotion. One casualty was an acceptable, even expected outcome. The aide, however, was aghast, his weak stomach turning at the sight of one of his own being cornered. Why are you just standing there watching? He had the audacity to ask me, as the proud sword of House Saxon lay exposed. I turned my gaze on him, and the sheer coldness in my eyes was enough to silence his pathetic whining. My father and his man stood frozen, finally understanding they were in the presence of something beyond their comprehension. The orc raised its weapon for the killing blow. Riding down the cliff would take too long. I would have to intervene from here, but a standard ice bolt lacked the penetrating power for an orc's hide. I began crafting a new magical formula in my mind, combining the base spell with the concepts of a bullet and a sniper rifle from my past life. The mana swirled as I finalized the incantation, naming it after a weapon of supreme efficiency, Ice Bolt. Barrett M98B configuration. A near-invisible sliver of ice shot across the battlefield, punching a perfectly clean hole through the orc's skull from hundreds of meters away. The two men standing beside me could only stare, their mouths agape in utter disbelief, while the aide stammered about the impossible distance and accuracy. I was already mounting my horse. My father waved off the commander who tried to stop me, a look of dawning comprehension on his face. He was finally beginning to see the truth. For a child to spontaneously create a unique formula with such lethal power, it could only mean my inner magical world was already nearing completion. By the time I reached the canyon floor, the other orcs had finished regrouping. A particularly large brute stepped forward, its muscles bulging as it tried to intimidate me. I immediately identified two problems: the useless knight still paralyzed with fear, and a more pressing tactical issue. My new sniper spell was far too complex to cast efficiently in close quarters combat. Just like a mathematical equation, the formula needed to be simplified for practical application. Ice 98 Magnum. No, still too long, too cumbersome. A small smile touched my lips as the perfect, simple name came to me: Ice Bullet. As the orc charged the screaming knight, I put my new theory to the test. My new abbreviated spell flashed through the air and pierced the charging beast's head with surgical precision. The knight could only stammer in disbelief, wondering why I would bother saving someone as insignificant as him. I looked down at the pathetic man. You don't need to worry. Our house never abandons a sword that shows loyalty, I lied, planting a seed of absolute devotion in his shattered mind. His moment of relief was cut short as the remaining orcs charged our position. They howled their rage, a sound I found increasingly tedious. It was time to end this. I channeled my darker energies, calling forth a shadow blade. The very ground around the orcs erupted into tendrils of living darkness that lashed out with unnatural speed. Their crude weapons were torn apart by my shadows. With a cold smile, I gave the shadows a single simple command: devour them. For the first time, I saw true terror in an orc's eyes as the darkness coiled around its thick legs. The shadows ripped and tore, consuming them whole, leaving nothing but screams in their wake. The sound of bones crunching echoed through the canyon as I stood calmly amidst the slaughter. The last surviving orc stared in catatonic horror at the gnawed bones of its kin. Still haven't run away? I asked, my voice laced with a predator's amusement. One last ice bullet put the final creature out of its misery. The battlefield was finally silent. Ah, that's good now, I said to the knight who informed me his legs were still frozen with fear. What an utterly useless man. Just then, the thunder of hooves announced my uncle's arrival. I'll leave the rest to you, Uncle Helmet. The main force of the cavalry arrived to find the battle already won, with me carrying their fallen comrade. My uncle, seizing the moment, roared for the final charge, a war cry in my name that would cement my reputation among the soldiers. Later that night, back at the main camp, my father summoned me. He wasn't there to praise my flawless victory, but to interrogate me. Why did you do such a foolish thing, rushing into enemy lines alone? I could only look up at him in genuine confusion. I had dominated the enemy and saved his men. Why am I getting scolded? It seemed even the man who sired me couldn't grasp the simple logic of overwhelming power. I stood before my father, his question hanging in the cold air. You said the knights of House Saxon are the ones I'll one day lead, so I simply carried out a mission worthy of that role. He wasn't impressed, dismissing my logic with a flick of his wrist. You're known for cherishing your knights, father, I pressed, my voice devoid of emotion. May I ask why you stood by and watched a ducal knight die? He explained the brutal reality of the northern borders, a place where monsters roam, and the hope of rescue is a liability. Even so, he admitted, his gaze softening for a fraction of a second. I wanted to save a knight who served you with loyalty. Like you once did, you mean? I retorted, my words cutting through his sentiment. You've made them believe someone else will always come to save them. He scowled, his lecture beginning. How many knights do you think survive with that kind of mindset? Only when they face something beyond their ability to handle, he declared, his voice resonating with absolute authority. Will I step in to stop that threat? It was a cold, hard truth, an argument I couldn't refute, and one that I in my past life had lived and died by. Yet before I could speak again, his expression changed. The way you turned conviction into action left quite an impression. He placed a hand on my shoulder, a rare gesture. Don't ever forget that, Dale. With the conversation concluded, he pulled back the tent flap, the bright light of day flooding in. Let's return to the castle. My story, of course, had already arrived before me, the tale of the young duke's son charging into a horde of orcs to save a single knight. It was the perfect gossip, a story that spread through the empire like wildfire, conveniently inflated with every retelling. I found the exaggerated heroics embarrassing, but the event was undeniably stirring new winds across the duchy. A few days later at the training grounds, I was greeted by the very men I was supposedly born to lead. They bowed in unison, a wave of steel and leather. You really don't have to do all that. But Helmet, the knight I'd rescued, placed a hand on my shoulder. Stand tall with pride, young master. He turned to the others, his voice booming with fervor. For the sake of your future, we must become even stronger. A roar of agreement erupted from the knights as they raised their fists in the air, their loyalty now absolute. I watched them, a flicker of a smile on my face. They're all so fired up. Just then my attendant Eve approached. Young master, it's about time for the guests from House Orhart to arrive. I nodded to Helmet. Let's go. It was time to greet some very special guests, a house with a very specific history. House Orhart, the famed warrior house, led by the legendary divine sword Bartel. They were a fallen power, their kingdom of Teutonia crushed during the Empire's unification war. With the death of the divine sword, the family was utterly ruined. I glanced at Helmet, noticing the grim set of his jaw. That's quite the look, Uncle Helmet. You must be thinking of the man who led you onto the path of knighthood. He said nothing, but I could feel the bitter taste of his memories. We entered the grand hall just as my father was asking about me. You arrived right on time. As the massive doors swung open, I gave the order. Show them the utmost courtesy. A woman and a young girl entered, the last remnants of a once great house. Vanessa Orlhart humbly greets the Duke of Saxon. The mother bowed, but the daughter, Charlotte, stared at her with undisguised fury. Her eyes burned with indignation. Why are you bowing your head to people like them? Finally, her pride shattered her composure. Shah Charlotte, her mother hissed in panic. My father, ever the diplomat, waved a dismissive hand and turned to me. Dale, would you please escort Lady Charlotte and show her around the castle? I stepped forward with a practiced smile, offering my hand, only for her to slap it away with a vicious snarl. The adults stared in stunned silence. I was simply intrigued. My mother sighed at the display, muttering about shameless nobles. Vanessa grabbed her daughter's arm, her voice a frantic whisper. Charlotte, apologize to the young master this instant. The girl just clicked her tongue in defiance. Then she turned and bolted from the room. Her mother dropped into a desperate bow, pleading for forgiveness. She's been reacting strongly because of something that happened recently. My father's curiosity was piqued. What exactly happened? She told us of Count Brandenburg, a so-called holy knight appointed as inspector over their lands. A man I knew by his more fitting title, the Pig King, a predator who lusted after talented swordswomen to breed a perfect heir. His depravity knew no bounds, targeting even young girls, and they had barely escaped before he could lay his filthy hands on Charlotte. Vanessa clutched her dress, her voice trembling with fear and helplessness. As a fallen noble, I lacked the power to protect her. She fell to her knees. I beg of you, please take my daughter into House Saxon as a maid, so that man can never touch her again. I found the girl later, wandering aimlessly in the training grounds. I gestured to the hand she'd slapped. Is your hand all right? Instead of answering, her eyes blazed with light and her aura exploded around her. In that case, she declared, her sword gleaming, you'll have to duel me. She pointed her blade directly at my throat, her voice ringing with the pride of a fallen warrior. Dale of Saxon, draw your sword. I couldn't help but let a small, amused smile cross my face. What? This girl pointed her sword at me, her expression a mix of childish bravado and desperation. Duel me, she demanded. I remained perfectly still, unmoved by her challenge. I need a reason, I stated coldly. She seemed taken aback for a moment, then puffed out her chest. I've heard many rumors, she began, as if gossip were a valid reason to waste my time. That you're an incredible man who single-handedly slaughtered 1,000 orcs and saved a fallen knight, she recited, the words sounding hollow and rehearsed. A flicker of memory, not of heroism, but of the cold satisfaction of tearing through flesh and bone, crossed my mind. She continued her pointless speech. By defeating you, the one said to have no equal in the Empire, I will show the entire world that I am stronger, she declared, her eyes burning with a naive fire. Then came the real reason, the kernel of truth in her posturing. And I will prove that I can protect my family from him, she vowed. That piqued my interest. Him? I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. The swordmaster, Count Brandenburg, she spat, and the name echoed in the frozen depths of my soul. The image of that monster, clad in black armor, flashed before my eyes, a ghost from a past I had clawed my way back from. An involuntary snarl twisted my lips. I've never forgotten that other bastard of the Empire, the one who stabbed me in the back. The rage I kept so carefully buried threatened to erupt. To hear his name here, from the mouth of this child, it was an unexpected, almost welcome catalyst. Her goal and mine were aligned. She could be a useful piece on the board, but her delusions of grandeur were an obstacle. First, I needed to teach her a lesson in reality. I turned my back on her, a dismissive gesture that left her utterly bewildered. Walking over to a rack of blunted practice blades, I spoke without looking back. You're just a child who knows nothing. I selected a simple dagger, a toy compared to what I was capable of, and her eyes widened in insulted shock. Come at me with all you've got, I commanded, my tone leaving no room for argument. Her knuckles turned white as she gripped her rapier, her pride clearly wounded. You don't have to tell me, she seethed through gritted teeth, her aura flaring to life. I will. She exploded forward, her blade trailing a vibrant green light. It was a surprisingly powerful long-range slash, meant to end this before it began. I met her rapier with my training dagger, the impact sending a dull thud through the air as I effortlessly neutralized her attack. She pressed on, a flurry of strikes that were fast but utterly predictable. With a cry, she launched herself into the air, aiming to cleave me in two. I sidestepped, letting her momentum carry her past me as her sword crashed into the empty snow. Her frustration was palpable. Each subsequent attack attack growing wilder and more desperate. I parried every blow with contemptuous ease, the rhythmic clash of steel the only sound in the courtyard. Her technique was transparent. Every time I diverted her attack, she'd use a quick snap of her wrist for a follow-up. She was coating the blade in a faint aura, a clever trick to compensate for her lack of raw strength. It was the only way she could possibly wield that rapier, which was clearly too heavy for her. It's a basic principle. Just as a mage generates mana from the circles in their heart, she moved with impressive speed, constantly trying to find a new angle of attack. Even now, she was circling, preparing another lunge. A knight can push past their physical limits by accumulating aura throughout their body. We clashed again, the force of her inherited power kicking up a small blizzard around us. The shockwave was proof enough of her lineage. As expected, blood doesn't lie. She was talented, I'd give her that. A smug little smile touched her lips as she channeled even more energy into her weapon. She lunged, her form nearly perfect. But I met her again, my expression one of utter boredom. She unleashed a massive arc of power, a desperate attempt to shatter my defense. If it was just this much, she thought she could win. A predatory grin spread across her face, drunk on the false belief that she was gaining an advantage. She was utterly convinced that she had the upper hand. Her entire life was a lie fed to her by her mother. A lie about a heroic father she never met. A lie that she had a duty to protect her family as the proud daughter of the divine sword. She had poured her blood and sweat into that lie, training until her body screamed. Even when her world crumbled around her, she clung to the belief in her sword. Why on earth, she muttered, her confidence finally beginning to crack. She spun into another attack, a whirlwind of green light and desperation. Does it keep getting blocked in front of this guy? She screamed in her mind. My dagger stopped her blade cold once more, and in that moment of contact, she finally realized the impossible gap between us. It was a truly pathetic last stand. I didn't even bother to move my feet, simply turning my wrist and guiding her blade away. Her eyes went wide with sheer disbelief. With a sharp flick, my dagger made contact with the hilt of her rapier. Her prized sword was sent spinning out of her hand. She stared at her empty palm, utterly defeated. How am I the daughter of the divine sword? Why can't I win? She whispered as her weapon fell and stabbed into the snow. I stood over her broken form, delivering the final crushing blow to her pride. Because you are not the divine sword. I let the words hang in the air for a moment. Of course, the pride you hold as the daughter of the divine sword isn't wrong. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with confusion and tears. However, as you are now, I stated, you can never protect your family from him. The truth struck her like a physical blow, and the tears finally began to fall. The swordmaster's blade is dozens of times stronger than even I am right now, I lied, planting the seeds of both fear and purpose. Then what am I supposed to do? She choked out, her voice trembling. What on earth do I have to do? She cried, completely broken. This was the moment I was waiting for. I, Dale of Saxon, will stake the name of the ducal family and become the guardian of the Orlhart family. She stared at me, utterly speechless. Until the day you become strong enough to defeat him, I continued, setting the conditions. I picked up her rapier and offered it back to her. Hilt first. I and the Saxon family will become the shield that protects you. Why? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Because your sword is worth that much, I answered, rebuilding the pride I had just systematically dismantled. Will you swear to become a sword for me and the Saxon family? A small, determined smile formed on her lips as she took the hilt. She immediately dropped to one knee, her head bowed in fealty. I, Charlotte Orlhart, pledge upon my honor as a knight. A perfect picture of a loyal vassal swearing an oath to her new lord. It may have seemed like a simple promise between two children, to an outsider, but the look in her eyes held the weight and resolve of an unbreakable oath. And just like that, the last daughter of the divine sword was mine to command. Later, in my father's office, he broke the silence. At the request of Lady Orlhart, Miss Charlotte has become a handmaiden to the ducal family. My father seemed almost amused. Unexpectedly, Miss Charlotte readily agreed. He looked at me, his eyes sharp and analytical. What happened between you and that child? I made a promise, I said simply, that in the name of the ducal family of Saxon, we would protect the Orlhart family. His gaze narrowed. He knew me too well. Surely you didn't invoke the ducal name simply because you pitied her circumstances, he probed. No, father, I replied calmly. He cut straight to the point. What is it you seek to gain? I laid out the logic of my plan. The sole bloodline of the divine sword. Her talent is, as expected, outstanding. I looked him dead in the eye. I have promised a pledge of fealty with Miss Charlotte. What I seek to gain is a single divine sword to be wielded for our ducal family, father. He was silent for a long moment, considering the strategic implications. A slow, calculating smile spread across his face. Good, he said, and I allowed myself a small smile in return. My plan was a success. With the last of the divine sword's bloodline under our protection, it was a significant political blow against that bastard Brandenburg. Meanwhile, in the old capital of Malbarock, the news was not being received quite so calmly. Damn it, Count Brandenburg roared, smashing his fist against a delicate crystal. The shards scattered across his desk. How dare they make the first move? A cloaked servant trembled on the floor. I apologize, my lord Count. Brandenburg slammed his hand on the table again, his face purple with rage. You foolish oafs, failing to catch one little brat, he screamed. Another subordinate reported from the doorway. We sent assassins, but it seems they were killed before reaching the Saxon estate. We presume that Charlotte Orhart dealt with them, the man concluded, an assumption so laughably wrong it was almost insulting. A bunch of useless fools, every last one of them, Brandenburg snarled. He paced his chamber, his rage simmering. Leaning over his desk, he let out a wistful sigh. Ah, those were the days. A twisted memory surfaced. The moment he betrayed his comrade and stole his power, he picked up the stolen holy sword, Durandal, stroking it like a lover. Isn't that right, my holy sword? My lovely fiancée, he whispered to the inanimate object. Please wait just a little longer. He licked the flat of the blade, a grotesque display of his obsession. No matter what it takes, I will bring the perfect bloodline to succeed me and wield you, he vowed. He turned to his cowering servant. Call the Thieves' Guild and send someone to the duchy. He pointed the sword, his eyes burning with a mad light. I will pay any price, even 1,000 gold, he declared. A truly disturbing smile crept onto his face. Bring that wench, Charlotte, before me, he commanded, sealing his own fate. A week has passed since the proud Princess Charlotte bent her knee and swore her loyalty to me. Settling into this new life, she seemed to find the Duke's castle a stark contrast to her former home. Sir Helmut, one of the continent's 7 great swords, stood before us on the training grounds. He asked if we were ready, his voice echoing in the cold air. I gave a curt nod, my hand already resting on my blade. Charlotte, with a fire in her eyes I hadn't seen before, affirmed her readiness as well. With a sharp grin, Sir Helmut gave the command to begin. The clash of our blades was immediate, a sharp ring of steel on steel. I deflected her initial predictable assault with ease. Her form was aggressive, but lacked the refinement of a true master. Sir Helmut watched us with an unnervingly analytical gaze. He recognized this wasn't mere child's play. He could feel the raw killing intent radiating from us. I sidestepped another one of her wide swings, a pathetic attempt to overpower me. Using my cloak for misdirection, I created an opening in her guard. Her eyes widened in shock as she realized her mistake too late. In an instant, my blade was at her throat. Sir Helmut stopped the match, praising her effort, but she wasn't interested in empty compliments. She demanded to know what she was lacking, her pride clearly wounded. He explained that the core of her rapier technique was flawed. She relied on arm strength instead of footwork. It was a novice mistake, one that made her every move telegraphed and easy to counter. She tried to protest, claiming she never had a proper teacher, a pitiful excuse. Sir Helmut simply laughed, telling her he'd fix her sloppy form, much to her annoyance. With a master like him, she will grow strong, and I cannot allow myself to be overtaken. Later, I focused on my own power, recalling the principles of mana. For most mages, forming even one mana circle can take decades of painstaking effort. My teacher, the elf Lacella, was already shocked that I had completed my second. She has no idea of my true progress. A typical mage's first circle rotates at 300 RPM, while my current RPM already exceeds 2000. This meant I had already met the requirements to form a third circle. With this much power at my disposal, a simple experiment was in order. I decided to enhance my basic Ice Bullet spell. By manipulating the spell's structure, I could forge an armor-piercing variant. I took aim at a distant tree, unleashing the newly crafted magic. The projectile tore through the air, impacting with devastating force. Lacella appeared, stunned by the crater left by a single modified first circle spell. She praised me, calling me a fast learner, still completely oblivious to the scale of my talent. I offered her some hollow gratitude. Her basic lessons were a useful cover for my true abilities. She sees a talented child, a prodigy she can mold. She has no comprehension of the monster she is dealing with. Still, her misplaced faith is a useful tool, and for a moment, her pride in me felt strange. Her sudden embrace caught me off guard, a completely unexpected physical contact. Later that dawn, the memory was still an unwelcome distraction. I pushed the thought aside, refocusing on my training. I conjured a wall of ice, then began experimenting with new applications. My next creation, a 12-gauge buckshot version of Ice Bullet. The single projectile shattered into a spray of deadly shards. Each one struck the ice wall with pinpoint accuracy. Perhaps slug rounds would be a more efficient application of mana next time. A voice interrupted my thoughts, calling my name. It was Charlotte, her footsteps quiet in the snow. She looked surprised to find me practicing as well. She awkwardly began to apologize for her past actions, for being selfish. I truly regret being so rude to you, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I almost laughed. It wasn't just rude, it was a pathetic assassination attempt, but I decided to be magnanimous. For you, I said with a smile, I'll make a special exception and forgive you. We stood in the silent forest for a moment, the tension finally broken. I commented on the cold, how it helps me focus when training. To my surprise, she agreed, finding a strange comfort in the same cold that I did. From the window, my parents watched me and Charlotte, their minds filled with the usual noble contrivances. They wondered aloud if we would make a suitable pair, a thought process as predictable as it was irrelevant. Their conclusion was to simply observe us further, as if our lives were a stage play for their amusement. Mother, ever the sentimentalist, decided it was her duty to guide my feelings, a plan I found pathetically endearing. Later, I accompanied her to the city's slum district, the breeding ground of desperation she called her relief work. Her main task was handing out scraps of food and offering meaningless jobs, a flimsy bandage on a festering wound. As Charlotte and I stood by, a filthy child suddenly darted out from the crowd, grabbing her arm. "My mom is in danger," he cried, a performance worthy of the stage. Something was immediately off. The boy was leading us into a complex web of alleyways, away from any potential witnesses. My mind was already dissecting the ploy. It was strange from the beginning that he asked a child for help instead of a knight or any other adult. The conclusion was simple. The kid was from the Thieves Guild, and their target was Charlotte. "Just a moment, I'll go get my mom," the boy said before disappearing, and Charlotte, ever the naive one, simply agreed. As if on cue, figures melted from the shadows, their leader stepping forward with a theatrical sneer. "To think someone so noble would grace a dangerous place like this," he mocked as his men surrounded us, making it clear their business was with the little maid. He then had the audacity to warn me, the young master, to stay out of it. "You might get hurt if you act rashly," he threatened, his eyes glinting with pathetic confidence. The fool actually smiled, convinced he had us trapped. I stepped in front of Charlotte, my voice laced with cold formality. "I, Dale von Zuxen, have sworn to protect the young lady of House Orhart from thugs like you." The leader chuckled, a grating sound. "Ah, the chivalry is truly magnificent," he sneered, adding that it would have been better if I had considered the time and place. He raised his blade, ready to teach me about the harshness of the world. His men closed in, a pack of hyenas certain of their prey. Charlotte whispered that she'd left her sword behind, a hint of panic in her voice. "It's fine, don't be scared," I told her, because this was the perfect chance to test the new skill of my shadow cloak under the convenient pretext of self-defense. With a flicker of my will, shadow thorns erupted from the cobblestones, halting the attackers instantly. Their pathetic charge came to a clumsy, confused stop. "Wind." The leader's face went pale as he finally grasped the situation. "Get out of the way now, you idiots," he shrieked. He was quick on the uptake, as expected of a high-ranking thief, but his realization came far too late. One of his men screamed as the shadows enveloped him, not killing him, but changing him. This was a new skill I'd acquired after reaching the second circle, a parasitic shadow that creates an undead soldier. The leader could only stare in speechless horror. His men watched, terrified, asking what monstrosity I was making. The shadows finished their work, and the thing that was once a man let out a piercing shriek. It was a soldier of hunger, and its former comrades looked on, paralyzed with fear. "What are you doing? Kill that thing!" the leader screamed, his men charging forward out of pure terror. He had decided I was more than he could handle. To hell with the mission. Escape was his only priority now. He made a break for it, but my new puppet was already on him, a blur of dark limbs. He desperately retaliated, boasting that not even two oracles could stop him in this alley, as he threw a volley of glowing daggers. His last-ditch effort was laughably weak, and I casually swatted his projectiles aside. I had already prepared a countermeasure from my past life, a simple but effective piece of magic. A storm of magic pellets tore through the air, riddling his body and blasting him backward. The impact slammed him into the unforgiving stone. From behind a corner, Charlotte watched, her eyes wide. He was on his knees, bleeding, when my shadow soldier descended upon him with a ravenous screech. His aura had protected him from a clean kill, but it only delayed the inevitable. "Not yet," he snarled, raising his dagger for one final pathetic act of defiance. As he lunged, my shadows shot out, impaling his limbs and leaving him completely defenseless for the creature's final assault. My soldier began to feed, its endless hunger finally finding a temporary release. I turned to Charlotte. She shook her head, still processing the brutal efficiency of the slaughter. One of the last thugs was trying to crawl away, so I silenced his whimpering with a casual ice bullet to his leg. He screamed as the frost consumed his limb. The other was being torn apart by my soldier, so I simply called it back. The last survivor groveled at my feet. "I'll tell you everything I know," he pleaded. He looked up at me with desperate, hopeful eyes, but I already had all the information I needed. "I'm not particularly interested," I stated, my voice devoid of any emotion. Another silent spell, and his pleading was permanently silenced. I looked down at the pathetic fool I'd just dispatched, his body twitching on the grimy cobblestones. Charlotte stared, her voice barely a whisper. She took in the scene, the fear in the alley, the absolute finality of my work, and finally understood. "That's right, this is the true face of the Saxon Duchy that people fear." Her gaze then shifted from the corpse to me, a flicker of comprehension in her eyes. "And it's also the power of the duchy that will protect you." I met her stare, my expression unreadable. "How is it seeing it in person? Are you afraid?" She hesitated only a moment before admitting, "A little, but it's okay. You fought to protect me after all." Her mind drifted back to the oath she swore, kneeling before me, with her father's sword. "If your family becomes the shield that protects my family," she recalled her own words, "then in the future, I will repay you by becoming a sword wielded for your sake." A bright, almost fanatical light entered her eyes as she looked at me now. "Thank you for showing me a future. I'm going to get stronger." Good. A dull blade is of no use to anyone. Taking Charlotte in was a calculated decision. It was partly to settle a debt of guilt I felt towards her father, Sir Vidal, a man who died because of others' incompetence. I extended my hand to her, an offer and a command in one gesture. Therefore her volunteering to become my sword meant far more to me than she could possibly imagine. She placed her hand in mine, sealing the pact not just with words but with will. Far away, Count Brandenburg, the architect of this little scheme, was undoubtedly seething in his study. The old fool was probably clenching his fists, cursing my name under his breath. He held the formal invitation from my father, a letter written with all the predatory grace of a death sentence. It was a summons from the Black Duke, a polite way of saying he was being held responsible for his failure. Even for the so-called sword saint of the empire, there was no refusing a call from my father. A few days later, the Count arrived at our castle, his armor polished but his face strained. "You've made a difficult journey, Count," my father stated from his throne, his voice devoid of any real warmth. The man knelt, his pride visibly cracking under the pressure of the throne room. "I didn't expect you to arrive so soon," father continued, enjoying the man's discomfort. He gestured dismissively. "Please forgive our somewhat lacking welcome." The Count forced a hollow laugh. "What could be more urgent than a summons from your grace?" The Duke, his eyes darted towards Charlotte and me, a flicker of hatred in his gaze, as he muttered about slippery little brats. He then put on a grand performance for the court, speaking of the great concern in the empire over an attempted kidnapping in broad daylight. My father remained silent, letting the fool dig his own grave. The Count actually smirked, believing he was in control. "I can guess why you've summoned me, however." As the Emperor's loyal sword, father's voice suddenly dropped, laced with contempt and crackling with dark energy. How could I possibly be involved in such an unsavory affair? In an instant, overwhelming pressure slammed down upon the entire hall. The Count's men were ripped from their feet by an unseen force, their armor groaning as shadows coiled around them. They were suspended in the air, utterly helpless. "Co-Count," another screamed as the dark magic began to dissolve his very being. His knights, members of the supposedly elite Holy Order of Magdalena, were annihilated without a chance to even resist, their pathetic screams for help echoing for a brief moment. The Count's eyes widened in horror. He recognized it too late, father's infamous high-level dark magic, the Tempest of Nil. One of his retainers tried to draw his sword, shouting my father's title in defiance. "Sword Saint, you will kneel and remain still," father commanded, his voice an iron law. "Du fool, do you have any idea what you're doing, Duke?" Brandenburg bellowed, still trying to project authority he no longer possessed. There would be no second warning. The sheer force of my father's will slammed the so-called sword saint to the floor, forcing him onto his knees like a common beggar. "As you know," father said calmly, as if nothing had happened, "I called you here for the sake of peace, Count." The humiliated man could do nothing but tremble on the cold stone. Then came the final chilling promise. "If you ever try to lay a hand on the children of Saxon again, I will slaughter every last member of the Brandenburg family." The Count's face was pale, drenched in a cold sweat. The message was perfectly clear. "You must be tired from your arduous journey," father said, his tone shifting to one of mock concern. "Please warm yourself." Scrambling to his feet, the Count could barely form a coherent sentence. "Due to circumstances, I'm afraid it will be difficult for me to stay any longer in your domain." My father smiled, a predator watching its prey flee. "Is that so? I wish you a safe journey back." And with that, the sword saint practically ran from our castle. This was more than just punishment. It was a political maneuver. Count Brandenburg is one of the Emperor's most loyal followers. What my father showed this confidant of the Emperor's faction will become the fuse that shakes the entire empire. It will start as a tiny spark, and when that spark grows into a raging flame, taking the Sword Saint's head will be our role to play. Around the time the news spread that the Sword Saint had knelt before the Black Duke, my father summoned my tutor to his office. Lady Sapia looked nervous as she stood before him. He gestured to a pile of shrouded forms on the floor. "These are the corpses of the Thieves Guild members who attacked Dale." The elf's eyes widened in disbelief, her hand flying to her mouth. He had the servants unveil the bodies, revealing the one who threw up its intestines, and the others crushed and riddled with holes. For the first time since she began teaching me, Sepia began to wonder if her conventional methods were wrong. This was precisely the reaction my father had intended. "As you can see, in order to properly guide Dale's talent, we need your wisdom. Lady Sepia, we would like to offer you the position of chief advisor." She immediately understood the weight of the offer. She was being asked to become a member of the Saxon family, not just a mere tutor. "As much as Dale relies on you, guiding him is not something I can do with my strength alone," he told her, a masterful bit of manipulation. "But things will be different if you lend us your strength, Lady Sepia." She stood in silence, her mind racing. Finally, she bowed her head. "Yes, I understand." She knew her purpose had fundamentally changed. Knowing how I view this world was now a more crucial task for her than ever before. Time passed, and my 10th birthday arrived. The guest list, reflecting the new political climate. This year, members of the Emperor's faction were in attendance. Among them, one particularly noticeable figure made his way towards me. "Welcome, Marquis Eulis," my father announced. The red-haired man smiled, his eyes locking onto mine. "A pleasure to meet you, young Master Dale." The banquet was a predictable gathering of peacocks. These central nobles, the core of the Emperor's power, paraded around my home as if they owned it. They feigned surprise at the quality of the food, whispering how unexpected it was for the barbaric north. I watched their hollow smiles and listened to their empty flattery, knowing the truth of their visit. Their very presence here, in my home, on my birthday, was an implicit warning. It was a message from the imperial family, a reminder that they were watching, that any perceived insult against their precious sword saint would not be tolerated. Now the messenger, the one who understood this political theater better than anyone, had appeared before me. "So this is young young Master Dale, the man with hair like fire said, his smile a carefully crafted mask. Lord Crimson, Marquis Euless, the infamous head of the Red Magic Tower, an institution that worships power and fury above all else. In a past life, the mages of his tower were the enforcers of any ambition, no matter how cruel. And I knew their cruelty intimately. It was by the hands of the Red Tower's mages that I was subjected to endless, agonizing modifications. The genius prodigy of the ducal family, he purred, his words dripping with false admiration. I've heard you possess a talent for magic unrivaled throughout the Empire. He recounted the gossip of me wiping out an orc horde at the age of 9, his eyes searching for any hint of weakness or pride. I offered him nothing but a faint, polite smile. Thank you, I said, my tone final. I hope you have a pleasant time. Getting birthday wishes from hyenas is always so tiring. I would much rather be training with Charlotte, but her official position as Elena's lady-in-waiting makes that politically complicated. I decided to find a quiet corner of the garden to practice my sword forms alone, but the night was shattered by a sudden, piercing scream. That voice, I knew it. A man's vulgar shout followed. Stay still, you damn serving wench. I found her on the ground, pleading for her life. Please, I beg you, I serve the house of Saxon. A corpulent pig of a man loomed over her, sneering. How dare a lowly maid speak the name of the ducal family? He gestured back toward the mansion. It's the young lord's birthday or whatever, everyone's just sitting around. He pressed a dagger to her throat. Instead of wasting time, it's more beneficial to play with a girl. I watched from the edge of the clearing as he prepared to commit his filth on my land. What do you think you are doing? I asked, my voice cutting through the silence. The girl Eve looked up with desperate hope, while the pig turned, his face a mask of confusion. Well, that is, he stammered, caught completely off guard. Then the fool made his final mistake, trying to treat me like a child. Young master, have you ever had fun with a woman? A disgusting, leering smile spread across his face. I, Petro, shall personally teach you, he offered, pulling the terrified Eve closer. He was so absorbed in his own depravity, he didn't even notice my hands moving. Don't you worry, I said calmly to Eve, a complex magic circle already forming at my fingertips. I will save you soon. In this class-obsessed society, he couldn't conceive that I, a duke's son, would attack him over a maid. A blade of solid ice erupted from the ground, striking him with brutal force and throwing him away from his victim. He hit the grass with a pathetic thud, but I had no intention of backing down. Raising a hand against one of the emperor's dogs is a poor political choice, but I have my own set of rules. What is the meaning of this, young Master Dale? He shrieked, clutching his bleeding face. I gave him a single simple command. Kneel. His eyes went wide with disbelief. What? Did you not hear me? I asked, my patience wearing thin. Kneel, and apologize to Miss Eve. This damn little brat, he seethed, his arrogance still refusing to bend. He tried to hide behind his master's authority. I am here on behalf of His Majesty the Emperor. To insult me is to mock a bull. I cut him off. Does the Emperor have a hobby of raping other people's maids? My question hung in the air just as the other nobles began to arrive. I stared down at the trembling man. This is the last time. Marquis Euless strolled into view with my father, a look of pure amusement on his face. This is quite a spectacle. Dale, what is this commotion? My father demanded, and I explained calmly. This man was trying to assault a maid of our Saxon family, and for something as trivial as that, you treat Sir Petro with such disrespect? My father chided, and the worm actually puffed out his chest. My eyes narrowed. Who told you that you could stand? I said, and a wave of force slammed him back to his knees. I addressed the entire imperial delegation. You nobles who have come from the capital are all entrusted with the important duty of acting on behalf of His Majesty. I pointed a finger at the sniveling heap on the ground. And yet, this man attempted to tarnish His Majesty's name by assaulting a lowly maid. I let my words sink in. Therefore, I could not tolerate Sir Petro's disgraceful behavior. Marquis Euless let out a soft chuckle. Well now, the young master's brilliance is quite a masterpiece. He turned to the crowd, his smile sharp as a razor. The young master's words are absolutely correct. Euless's gaze fell upon Petro, cold and merciless. How dare a body acting on behalf of His Majesty attempt to assault a mere lowly maid? A flicker of fire appeared at the Marquis's fingertip as he gave an order. Taluera, kill this vermin. Petro's screams were pathetic as a figure cloaked in shadow and flame descended upon him. A whip of pure fire lashed out, wrapping around the man's body. His shrieks of agony echoed briefly before being consumed by the roaring inferno. Euless turned to me as the body turned to ash. The young master's words are 100 times right. It is my job, after all, to incinerate the vermin who try to insult the imperial family. He put a hand on my shoulder, his crimson eyes boring into mine. Young Master Dale, I have high hopes for your future. The last of the Emperor's men scurried away, and a false peace settled over the Duke's castle. I watched her leave, wondering why she would hesitate over something so trivial. Was she truly so flustered just to express her mindless devotion? Her downcast eyes and clasped hands told a story of a simple girl in a world far too complex for her. I've had lifetimes of experience, but this kind of blind faith is something I still find inefficient, though I suppose I must get used to leveraging it. I put on the mask of a gentle young master and offered a small smile. She flinched, just as I expected. I am the eldest son of this ducal house, a name that that carries immense weight. I understand that weight perfectly, and I will use every ounce of its power to achieve my one true goal, bringing the empire that betrayed me to its knees. My father summoned me to his study, his expression unreadable. He clasped his hands, starting with hollow praise about my supposed brilliance. "But your recent actions have been strange, Dale," he stated, his eyes narrowing. I stood before his desk, playing the part of the innocent son, and asked, "Why is that?" I let the silence hang in the air, waiting for him to reveal his hand. "Did you know," he began, his voice low, "if the hero from another world hadn't died fighting Lord Battelle, the next target of the hero's sword would have been our territory, the Duchy of Saxon." His eyes widened in shock when I didn't react with surprise, finally realizing I understood the political game. He called my confidence audacious and demanded to know what made me so certain. I met his gaze without flinching, feeding him a carefully crafted version of the truth. "Because in my past life," I said, watching his composure crack, "I heard the Empire plotting against our house. The fools chose to discard their greatest weapon, the hero, once he had served his purpose. They feared their own hunting dog slipping its leash, a classic fatal error of arrogant tyrants." I began to lay out the Empire's hypocrisy, explaining how they deliberately left the Demon King's territory to fester after the war. It was a convenient excuse, a perpetual crisis, to keep their vassals in line. They gave the absurd order to cultivate that corrupted land, a death sentence for anyone sent there. They forced House Saxon to bleed its resources and manpower on this impossible task, even bestowing the land upon you, father, I said, twisting the knife. I looked him directly in the eye, forcing him to confront the bitter truth of our situation. His face was a mask of grim understanding. He knew our house was trapped in a slow, draining death. He clenched his fists on his desk, the reality of the Empire's betrayal sinking in. I continued, "Furthermore, they use their propaganda to paint us as villains, calling us the clan of darkness to the common folk. The whispers of the court are a weapon, and the Empire wields it with precision." He finally saw the complete picture. "Just as they discarded the hero," he seethed, "they will try to eliminate us." But then he asked the one question I was waiting for. "How could you possibly know they discarded the hero?" "It's merely my own conjecture," I lied smoothly, "based on logical inconsistencies I found while reading in the archives. The official story they peddled to the masses was laughably thin, if you knew where to look. A fierce battle," I quoted, "where the hero met an honorable death. A pathetic cover for assassination." He was stunned, believing a child could unravel a state secret just from reading books. His shock was my victory. I pressed my advantage, defining the Empire in terms he couldn't ignore. "Their justice is nothing more than the violence of an oppressor, stealing from those too weak to fight back." I stood my ground, my judgment delivered, waiting for his response. His internal monologue must have been glorious. He was finally seeing the wisdom of ages trapped in this child's body. But he looked at me not as a son, but as a weapon he could finally wield. "Then in your opinion," he asked, his voice heavy, "what path should our house take?" I gave him the only possible answer. "Coexistence is impossible. Therefore we must destroy the Empire." The shock on his face was immensely satisfying. The very air in the room seemed to vibrate with the weight of my declaration. He leaned back, his throne creaking under the sudden tension. "Dale!" I waited, my expression unchanged, as he processed the treason I had just proposed. His eyes narrowed into slits of purple fire. "Do you realize what you're saying?" He was testing my resolve, and I would not be found wanting. "I'm not suggesting a foolish, immediate rebellion," I clarified, my voice cold and steady. This wasn't a tantrum. It was a declaration of a meticulously planned war. "I am talking about 10 years from now." He repeated the words, the time frame giving him a lifeline to grasp. 10 years. I began to list the Empire's weaknesses, the cracks already forming in its foundation, like the resistance forces stirring across the continent. All these fools yearning for freedom would become my pawns. The economy is failing, lords are growing anxious, and bandits plague the roads. The Empire is rotting from within. The aftermath of their glorious unification is a festering wound they can no longer hide. "For now we build our strength," I declared, my voice resonating with absolute certainty. He listened, his role shifting from a father to a subordinate hearing my strategy. "We will secretly fund the resistance forces," I continued, fanning the flames of rebellion to weaken the Empire from the inside out. I explained my entire grand strategy, a decade-long plan for the complete and utter annihilation of our enemies. I spoke until the sun began to dip below the horizon, leaving the room in shadows. When I finished, I posed the simple final question, "What do you think?" He was silent for a long time, the gears of his mind turning, processing the sheer audacity of my vision. Suddenly a low chuckle escaped his lips, a dark and predatory sound. It grew into a full-throated laugh, not of disbelief, but of pure, unadulterated admiration. "Truly," he said, his eyes gleaming with a newfound ambition, "the depths of your talent are immeasurable. You see a future that is far beyond what even I can perceive," he admitted. "Of course I do. I've already lived through one of their failed futures." He rose and placed a hand on my shoulder. "I am so incredibly proud that you are my son. From now on you are not a child. I will treat you as my equal," he declared, "the future head of House Saxon." "Father," I said. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. I now had the right to move the immense power of this house with my own hands. This was the true beginning of my revenge. Speak your mind, Dale, he urged, a grin spreading across his face. What is your first decision for our family? He was handing me the keys to the kingdom. You said you would treat me as an equal. I began with a cold smile. In that case, grant me permission to take the trial of the tower in Necropolis. The shock on his face was even more pronounced than when I had suggested treason. The trial of the tower, a brutal competition among mages to establish dominance within their ranks. It is a blood sport disguised as a hierarchy game where mages battle ancient guardians. Only the strongest can even survive, let alone climb the ranks. Those who defeat high-tier guardians earn the title of Elder, and the one who stands at the absolute pinnacle is crowned the Tower Master. The trial of the tower, he repeated, his voice laced with disbelief. That is a death sentence. He argued it was far too dangerous, especially for someone who hadn't even reached the third circle. It's too soon for you, he insisted, but I just smiled. He had no idea what I was capable of, citing that most mages only reach that level in their mid-20s. He looked at me, a prodigy who had reached the second circle, but still just a child in his eyes. He saw my potential, but couldn't grasp its true monstrous scale. This is a decision for the future of House Saxon, I stated, reframing his parental concern as a strategic imperative. In what way, he asked, intrigued by my logic. I laid out the political benefits plainly. If I prove myself, your position will be solidified by an air of undeniable power. And my own reputation will be built on fact, not the whispered rumors about a child prodigy. He finally understood my angle. So that's why you want to take the trial? A slow, calculating smile spread across his face as he realized the genius of the move. All right, I understand. I'll leave it to your judgment. My own smile was one of pure triumph. Yes, I will prove it to you, father. There was no other possible outcome. A few days later, our carriage rolled through the desolate gates of Necropolis, the city of the dead. The ominous towers of the city loomed over us, a fitting stage for my ascension. The massive doors to the central tower ground open before us. Our guards stood at attention as we prepared to disembark. It seems we've arrived, I noted, my voice devoid of emotion. The heavy doors swung wide, revealing the reception within. Awaiting us was a congregation of mages, all bowing their heads in a display of fealty. We humbly greet His Grace, the Black Duke. They chanted in unison, their voices laced with fear of my father's reputation. I let out a small theatrical yawn, feigning the boredom of a child dragged along on a business trip. Internally, however, I looked upon the groveling fools and smirked. Perhaps I had overdone the theatrics with my father, but for the revenge I have planned, there is no such thing as going too far. The whispers of the rabble filled the air, noting the arrival of my father, Duke Saxon, and of course me. They traded rumors, calling me a magical genius in one breath and a weakling in the next. Others muttered about how I looked like I was in rough shape, clearly underestimating the power I kept concealed. One particularly loud fool boasted that his swordsmanship was on par with my father's elite knights. How pathetic. This one, Velik, the supposed top graduate, was already declaring his victory before the test had even begun. His friend agreed, sneering that a single breath could knock me over. My father paid them no mind, offering his respects to the Lord of the Tower. He addressed the woman waiting for us. It's been a while, Eris. She bowed her head respectfully, replying that it was an honor to serve you, Lord Dale. Eris, an elder of the tower and my father's secretary general, was a woman of considerable authority. He turned to me, explaining that Eris would be my guide while the test was underway. I gave the expected reply, placing myself in her care with a polite, "Yes, father." She gestured for me to follow her into the depths of the tower. "Of course, my lord," she said. "This way, please." As we walked, she informed me that the 59 academy graduates were already waiting. My competition, a generous term for them. She brought me to a balcony overlooking a vast hall, announcing these were the competitors for the test of the tower. I looked down from my vantage point at the rows of hopeful fools. They were nothing more than cattle, waiting for the trial to begin. Eris's voice echoed through the hall, greeting all the gathered participants. She introduced herself as an elder and secretary general of the tower. "I will now explain the test for the first floor of the Black Magic Tower," she announced. She held up a pendant, its chain dangling from her fingers. "Everyone please check the life point necklace around your necks," she instructed, calling the test a battle point scramble. I picked up the cool metal of the necklace, its blue gem glowing faintly. She explained that each necklace contained a protective shield and was worth a single life point. The test would involve using the corpses scattered around the arena to attack our opponents. A direct hit would destroy the target's necklace, activating the shield and immediately eliminating them. The attacker who landed the eliminating blow would gain 1 point. To advance, one needed a final score of +3 points. Her final rule was simple. Using artifacts was considered cheating and resulted in disqualification. I understood perfectly these rules were designed to efficiently weed out the weak. However, my thoughts were cut short as I felt a gaze upon me. That monster. How did he reach the third circle at his age? One of them whispered in disbelief. Velik, the arrogant top graduate, pointed directly at me, a confident smirk on his face. Just like I said, he announced to his cronies, "Let's take down that monster first." One of his followers hesitated, asking if it was truly okay to attack the young lord. "No need to worry," Velik scoffed. "The moment we came here, we all became equal competitors. Well, I'll give you points for confidence. Now let's see if you're all talk, shall we?" As Eris declared the test's beginning, magic circles flared to life around the fools targeting me. They began to chant, raising the corpses littered around the arena floor. Velik poured his dark magic into a corpse, his face a mask of concentration. The mana twisted around the dead flesh, forcing it to rise. Its limbs contorted as it was pulled to its feet by his necromancy. It wasn't just him. Several of the graduates were reanimating the dead. Soon, a small horde of shambling corpses lurched towards me from all sides. One of them, armed with a crude blade, lunged forward. Its mouth hung open in a silent scream as it charged. I didn't even flinch. A simple barrier of force stopped its blade cold. The puppet's face cracked, its glowing eyes showing a hint of its master's shock. While they were focused on their pathetic attack, I had already reanimated a corpse of my own, shrouding it in ice magic. The fool Velik could only stammer. When did he? His undead soldier let out a pathetic groan as the ice consumed it. He stared in disbelief, recognizing the element I was using. Another one of his puppets, this one with claws, prepared to attack. Don't tell me that bastard has a dual affinity, he muttered, the reality of his situation dawning on him. With a single punch, my ice-clad soldier shattered his frozen puppet into 1,000 glittering shards. How dare you, my undead soldier, he cried out as if it were a masterpiece. The remaining puppets, controlled by his followers, closed in on me. A clumsy pincer attack from both sides. But they never reached me. My own soldier moved with impossible speed, putting itself between me and the pathetic assault. It's useless, he sneered, having applied the same ice magic to his own creation. I've protected it with ice armor. The sound of his armor cracking like cheap glass proved him wrong. My soldier's fist punched clean through his puppet's chest. Seeing his last defense crumble, he resorted to whining. Isn't using magic cheating, and a violation of the rules? I gave him a cold, bored look. The use of any magic besides black magic of undead revival and undead enhancement is supposed to be forbidden, he insisted. I simply tilted my head and asked, is that so? From her balcony, Eris simply watched, her expression unreadable. Her silence was my answer. Seeing as the test hasn't been stopped, I stated calmly, I suppose I must be right. He could only click his tongue in frustration, his argument destroyed. You guys block that undead soldier and aim for the young lord, he shrieked, his composure gone. His pack of fools summoned their own undead to swarm my creation. He yelled that with their numbers, they could easily overwhelm my single opponent. Come to think of it, the use of artifacts was forbidden. In that case, my own undead soldier kept their pathetic mob busy. This gave me the opening I needed. This is the only way, I thought, my plan solidifying. I moved towards one of the inanimate corpses on the floor. With a sharp crack, I snapped a large bone from the skeleton's arm. It wasn't an artifact, merely a part of the battlefield. Their puppets continued their futile assault, completely unaware of what I was doing. I stood, the makeshift weapon held firmly in my hand. It was time to end this. I dashed forward, ducking under a clumsy swing from one of his remaining puppets. Got you, I whispered, closing the distance in an instant. My smile was the last thing its master saw before I struck. The bone, reinforced with my own mana, became as hard as steel. I brought the sharpened edge down on the puppet's chest. It shattered on impact, the dark magic holding it together dissipating into nothing. I landed gracefully, already spotting my next target. With a flick of my wrist, I spun the bone sword, ready for another strike. No way. My undead soldier was cut down that easily, he stammered, his face pale. He realized it was no ordinary sword, but a weapon I had created on the spot. I poured more of my mana into the bone, causing it to glow with an ethereal light. Another puppet charged, swinging its own blade down towards my head. It was a clumsy, telegraphed attack. I easily parried the blow, the impact sending shudders through its decaying arm. With its guard broken, the puppet was completely exposed. I vaulted over its head, using its own body as a stepping stone. The tassels on my cape fluttered as I positioned myself for the final strike. The blade sliced cleanly through its neck. It exploded in a flash of blue light as my mana overloaded its core. I landed perfectly, my eyes already seeking the next fool. Velik's face was a mask of pure terror. Even my undead soldier is gone, he whispered, his last hope extinguished. Does it even make sense for a mage to be that skilled with a sword? He questioned, as I effortlessly dispatched another of his allies. With his pawns eliminated, only the self-proclaimed king remained. The floor was littered with the bodies of the eliminated. He scrambled backwards on the floor, his bravado completely gone. Eek, my lord, please, I beg you. Ah, come on, I said sweetly. It's not like you're actually gonna die. His eyes squeezed shut in terror as he braced for the inevitable. The necklace that would save his life was also the target I needed to claim my victory. I swung my bone sword in a clean arc. The blade connected squarely with his chest, right where the pendant lay. As the shield magic enveloped him, he could only call me what I was. Monster, you monster. A voice from above boomed. The results! I stood over the fallen bodies of every single competitor, the sole person left standing. The arena floor was silent, a testament to my efficiency. With 60 life points, Lord Dale is the sole person to pass, the voice declared. The few spectators who remained could only stare up at me in stunned silence. I allowed a small, confident smile to grace my lips. For a moment, there is a flicker of something akin to peace. Time flies, doesn't it? She asks, her voice a soft murmur against the biting wind. From the window of the distant manor, I can feel my parents' eyes on us, their minds undoubtedly filled with trivial thoughts of the future. My mother probably sees this as some quaint storybook romance, a duty to guide her son's supposed feelings. They see 2 children, but I see a necessary alliance and a path to power. For now, I'll play along, joining her in this pointless charity work on the outskirts of the duchy. A boy, no older than 10, suddenly runs towards us, his face a poorly constructed mask of panic, as he grabs Charlotte's arm. His eyes, wide and pleading, lock onto her as he begs for help. The performance is almost insulting in its lack of subtlety. Something is immediately wrong. The air itself feels thick with deceit. He leads us away from the knights and down a winding, empty alleyway. A child in genuine danger would seek the strongest protector, not the most approachable girl. From a rooftop, I spot the watcher from the Thieves' Guild, confirming my suspicions. The target was always Charlotte. The boy stops, telling us to wait here while he gets his mother. A final clumsy line in this pathetic play. Figures drop from the shadows, their boots hitting the cobblestones with a soft thud. Well, their leader sneers, his eyes filled with a predatory gleam as he sizes us up. He completely ignores me, his gaze fixed on Charlotte. Our business is with the little maid next to you. You might get hurt if you act rashly, he warns, a pathetic attempt at intimidation. The fool flashes a grin, confident in his numbers and my apparent youth. I step in front of Charlotte, my own smile hidden in the shadows. I, Dale von Sachsen, have sworn to protect a young lady of House Orhart from thugs like you. He scoffs, finding my declaration of chivalry magnificent, yet foolish. It seems you need to learn a little about the harshness of the world, he says, drawing his blade as his men close in. The pieces are all in place. Charlotte whispers that she left her sword behind, but I just tell her not to be scared. This is the perfect chance to test the new skill of my shadow cloak. With a single thought, shadows erupt from my cloak, lashing out like sentient whips. My assailants are thrown back, their surprise turning to confusion. The shadows twist and writhe around them, a vortex of pure darkness under my command. Their leader's face contorts in shock and he screams, "Get out of the way now, you idiots." At least he's quick to grasp a hopeless situation. A high-ranking thief perhaps, but still just vermin. His men are helpless as the shadows coil around them, not to crush, but to invade. This is a new application I've developed, a skill that implants a parasitic shadow creature into a living host. The host dies, and in its place, an undead soldier is born, moving entirely on my will. The leader can only watch in mute horror as his subordinate's body is consumed from within. His men don't understand what's happening as my shadow magic spreads. A monstrous creature tears its way out of the first victim's corpse, letting out a piercing shriek. The thief's face pales, recognizing the birth of an undead soldier. The leader bellows in a panic. "What are you doing? Kill that thing." He finally realizes I'm the real threat, but his revelation comes far too late. My new puppet lunges, moving with an unnatural speed that catches them all off guard. The leader parries its claws, his blades glowing with a faint green aura. He's competent, I'll grant him that, but he just cursed himself by engaging my pawn. While he's distracted, I prepare my own attack, forming a magic circle. A shotgun blast of pure mana erupts from my hands, tearing through the alley. He screams as the buckshot rips into his side, throwing him against the wall. Charlotte watches from the sidelines, her expression a mixture of shock and awe. My shadow soldier continues its relentless assault on the other thugs. The leader staggers to his feet, gritting his teeth. His aura saved him from instant death, but he's bleeding heavily. "Not yet, it's not over," he snarls, preparing for one last desperate charge. He lunges, but my shadow soldier is already there, its claws sinking deep into his flesh as I pin him with my magic. The creature shrieks with an insatiable hunger, feasting on the life force of its victim. With the last of the trash disposed of, I turn to Charlotte. "Are you hurt anywhere?" I ask, my voice calm as she sits against the wall, shaking her head. One of the thieves survived, trying to crawl away from the carnage, whimpering in terror. I raise my foot, channeling a simple spell. Ice bullet. The man cries out as his leg is frozen solid, and he collapses, pleading for me to save him as my shadow soldier looms over him. "Come back," I command the creature, giving him a sliver of false hope. He immediately starts babbling, promising to tell me everything he knows. Yes, I'm sure he would tell me everything, but I'm not particularly interested. Blood in the snow. A familiar sight in the Northern Empire, especially in my family's domain, the Duchy of Saxon. The memories of that life are like a distant echo, watching my knights cut down our enemies without a flicker of emotion. I remember the weight of my spear, wreathed in an aura that promised only death, a power they thought was a gift, but was merely a tool I had long since mastered. My gaze was always cold, even then, assessing the battlefield for the next fool to step forward. They would scream my name, pledging their lives to the young lord they so admired. For young Lord Dale, they'd bellow, charging into the fray on their war horses. They saw a prodigy, a hero in the making, and I let them believe it. Their blind loyalty was a useful asset, a shield for the name of House Saxon. After I finished another one of their pointless trials in that accursed tower, my so-called father had a new task for me. He ordered me, a child in their eyes, to lead a campaign against an orc horde. I crushed them under my heel, a simple task that required brute force and little else. A hammer was all that was needed, and I was happy to provide it. It was a heavy burden for a 10-year-old, or so they said. But for me it was just another day at the office, another step in a plan they couldn't possibly comprehend. Not a single one of those fools ever questioned my capability as a commander. As the rightful heir of the Black Duke, I began to consolidate the entire northern region under my influence. It was my birthright after all. I returned to the cold, sterile halls of our estate. The city stood as a monument to my family's power, a power I intended to claim for myself. I stood before my father, reporting the results of his little errand. "We have slain 45 orcs and report to your grace, the Duke," I stated flatly. He sat there, a king on his throne, listening with feigned interest. I asked the question I already knew the answer to, a formality for the men in the room. "What about our cavalry's losses?" The answer came as expected: 3 lightly injured, otherwise none. One of the vassals, a brute named Helmet, chimed in, assuming I'd used some cheap trick. "Did you use magic to protect them?" I met his gaze without blinking. "No, sir. It was solely thanks to the swords of House Saxon." A satisfactory answer, feeding their pathetic pride. My father even cracked a smug smile. "Well done, Dale," he said, the words as hollow as the man himself. One of his advisors was quick to sing my praises, noting how I'd grown accustomed to commanding a regiment-sized unit. I played the part of the dutiful son perfectly. "It's all thanks to Sir Helmet's teaching," I said, a little flattery going a long way with simple men. They ate it up, recounting how Helmet had taught me everything from swordsmanship to the art of war. The man puffed up his chest, a caricature of a proud mentor. They whispered amongst themselves that at this rate, the day I commanded my own territory in a domain war wasn't far off. I stood there silently, letting their ambitions for me take root. "A domain war," they said. "A new stage is always welcome, a bigger board for me to play on." During my training, there was one who tried to keep pace. Charlotte, with her desperate battle cry and her flurry of strikes. Her blade met mine with a sharp clang, but it was like a pebble striking a fortress wall. She was fast, I'd give her that, but speed without power is just a frantic dance before death. Her eyes flared with green aura, a sign of her considerable talent. She lunged, trying to catch me off guard with a thrust aimed at my throat. Predictable, I deflected her blade with contemptuous ease, my own sword already moving to counter. A simple parry was all it took to break her momentum. I pressed the advantage, my movements fluid and overwhelming. Our blades became a blur of motion, a storm of steel that she was quickly being lost in. I ended the spar by disarming her, my blade stopping a hair's breadth from her neck. "You've improved quite a bit," I commented, the words feeling utterly meaningless. She looked away, annoyed. "You say that like it's someone else's problem," she muttered. I offered a slight cold smile. "Haha, did I tease you too much?" She couldn't stand the gap between us. "You're already a 3rd circle mage, and you cleared the 20th stratum of the tower's trial," she recited, as if listing my crimes. "Ever since then, it's been nothing but young Lord Dale. Young Lord Dale, aren't you tired of it?" Her jealousy was as plain as the sword she could no longer hold. I decided to offer some placating words. "Don't worry too much," I told her, my tone detached. She looked at me, waiting for some profound wisdom she'd never receive. "You'll grow even stronger too, Charlotte," I said, a promise as empty as my praise. It was true. Her talent was far from ordinary for a 10-year-old girl. She clenched her fist, her pride wounded. "Wet! Don't treat me like a kid," she snapped, her face flushed with anger. I stated the obvious. "But you are a kid." She pointed at me indignantly. "You're one too." I simply shook my head. "Me? I'm already an adult," I declared, a truth she could never understand. I left her to stew in her frustration. Her childish emotions were a waste of my time. Later, Sir Helmet resumed my strategic lessons. "Now then, young Lord Dale, for today's lesson." He began unrolling a map on the table. "You'll be learning the hammer and anvil tactic." He placed a chess piece on the board, representing the core of the strategy. I already knew it, of course, from 100 other battlefields in 100 other lives. "The cavalry breaks through the enemy's flank to encircle them," I recited, explaining his own lesson back to him, "while the infantry holds off the enemy cavalry's countercharge." "That's the key, right?" I asked, looking up from the board. He nodded, impressed. "Precisely. To hammer and anvil. A fitting name. It strikes me how, no matter the world, the brutal nature of war never changes." Helmet then shifted the topic. "Oh right, speaking of which," he looked at me thoughtfully, "how is Charlotte's training coming along?" We already knew the answer. Charlotte's training, it can't compare to yours, my lord, he admitted, but it's nothing short of remarkable. He continued his assessment. "Her foundation in swordsmanship is already formed, and she'll soon begin formally learning the Saxon family's aura technique and sword style." He paused, his expression turning serious. "However, there's one concern." I finished his thought for him. "It's a fundamental principle of this world. Mages refine mana through their heart's circle. Knights refine and store mana as aura through sheer discipline. Mages form towers as their power structures. Knights form orders to pass down their sword legacies. Our family, House Saxon, commands one of the most powerful orders, the Black Cavalry, who shatter battlefields like war chariots. Our Night Raven order is built on one thing and one thing only: sheer, overwhelming power. The issue is that Charlotte's sword style pursues speed and agility. It's a fatal incompatibility. Helmet spelled it out. Considering her talent, she might barely make it into the ranks of the 7 swords, but she will never reach the first sword. That position, the absolute pinnacle of swordsmanship, was once held by her father. He was a master of a style that flowed like falling petals. The Sword of Blossom. Helmet sighed, lost in memory. If only that sword style still existed, but it vanished completely with the fall of the Night Kingdom. I remained silent, watching the chess piece in my hand. Vanished from this world, perhaps not entirely. While I was steadily building my reputation through grueling training and monster subjugations, our enemies were not idle. The time finally came to put my training to a real test. A messenger burst into the throne room, delivering news that made my father's face darken. "What did you just say?" he demanded. The man trembled. "The neighboring Baron Fokker's territory. He's claiming ownership of the copper mine you possess and has formally requested a domain war." A domain war. In this world, borders are vague, settled by strength, not treaties, but it was still suicide for a mere baron to challenge a duke. My father knew this was a proxy attack. I refused to yield the mine and agree to the domain war. He started, but the messenger cut him off with the real news. The Grand Duke of Brandenburg has sided with the baron's claim, and in exchange for a share of the copper mine's profits, he'll dispatch the Order of St. Magdalena. So that's their game. The Grand Duke, a petty man with a long memory. He still hasn't forgotten the humiliation he suffered at my father's hands years ago. A sly, predatory smile crept across my face. "So this is how you intend to come at us, is it? How amusing. Let them come." The reports on my desk confirmed what I already suspected. Count Brandenburg was a coward with a fragile ego. After my father publicly humiliated him, he's been festering, seeking some pathetic form of vengeance. His men were already on the move, a clear sign of his intentions. But instead of facing my father directly, he chose to stir up trouble in a remote border region, a classic move for a spineless weakling. I found my father in his throne room and addressed him directly. "Alongside the Knights of House Saxon, I will personally lead this battle," I declared, my voice steady and devoid of any childish pleading. He looked at me, his expression unchanged, and simply said no. He claimed it was too soon for me to take command, his words dripping with misplaced caution. I stood my ground, staring at his back as he dismissed my capabilities. "Refrain from such reckless words," he warned, his tone final. He then lectured me, claiming that a war against men is unlike subjugating monsters, as if I couldn't grasp the concept of strategy. He turned his attention to the sniveling Baron Greenbelt, whose lands were being threatened. "Do not worry," my father said, offering hollow assurances to the trembling man. "I will safeguard your mine." I watched them in silence, a cold knot of frustration tightening in my chest. I let out a quiet sigh of exasperation. I was certain I could do better than anyone else he would send, so why wouldn't he listen to me? As I stewed in my thoughts, Sir Johann, one of my father's knights, approached me. "Pay no mind to the Duke's words, young lord," he said, placing a patronizing hand on my shoulder. He tried to explain my father's reasoning, but I wasn't interested in excuses. "Instead, I have prepared this for you," he offered, trying to distract me like a simple child. He presented a polished wooden box, a glint in his eye. "How about learning to play a game with me?" he asked, opening it to reveal a checkered board. My eyes widened slightly as I looked at the board. This wasn't just a game. It was a military simulation, known here by a different name but fundamentally identical to the chess of my past life. "A war game?" I asked, feigning simple curiosity. He seemed pleased that I knew of it, explaining it was modeled after real warfare, and that mastering it would be a great help. He offered to compete with me and discuss the art of battle in depth. An idea sparked in my mind, a perfect opportunity. I saw the path to getting what I wanted. "This is it," I thought, grabbing the board from his hands. "Young lord, where are you going?" he called out, confused by my sudden action. My father looked up from his documents, annoyed by my return. I walked straight to his desk without a word. "If I compete with you and win," I challenged, my eyes locked on his, "will you allow me to join the territorial war?" I held the wargame board before him, an undeniable challenge he couldn't easily dismiss. Sir Johann tried to apologize for my audacity, but I ignored him. "I have learned that war is not merely a clash of strength, but a profound contest of strategy," I stated, echoing the very lessons he sought to teach me. I placed the board firmly on his desk. "I ask that you judge me through this game." Sir Johann tried to pull me away, muttering apologies to my father. "No, let him be," my father commanded, a flicker of interest in his eyes. He looked at me, then at the board, a silent assessment taking place. "If you win," he declared, "I will let you have your way." A small, triumphant smile touched my lips. "Thank you for believing in me," I said, though I knew belief had nothing to do with it. This was a transaction. "However," he added, his voice a low warning, "if you lose, you must give up on joining this battle." I sat across from him and made my first move without hesitation. The pieces clicked against the board, a symphony of my inevitable victory. The game was over in minutes, a swift and brutal checkmate. Sir Johann stared at the board, utterly speechless. "My goodness," he whispered in disbelief. I leaned back, a calm and satisfied smile on my face. "It is my victory," I announced, the remaining pieces on the board a testament to my strategic dominance. The knight could barely comprehend it, noting that my father had even shown me leniency. He had granted me superior numbers and a favorable terrain, yet I still defeated him 2-1 against Duke Saxon himself. I looked up at my father, my expression unwavering. Sir Johann turned to my father. "With this you will keep your promise, won't you?" My father chuckled softly, asking me how long I had known the game. I found the rulebook for it in the library and began studying it. I replied smoothly. Of course that was a complete lie. But if I didn't frame it in a way they could comprehend, they would see me as something stranger than a prodigy. He stood up from his desk, accepting the result. "A promise is a promise," he said, walking towards me. He placed a hand on my shoulder. "In my name I entrust to you the command of the knights in the coming battle." Sir Johann gasped, "Ja, your grace." My father's gaze was stern. "Yet no matter how high my expectations of you may be, with the honor of House Saxon at stake, defeat can never be permitted." He leaned down, his eyes boring into mine. "I shall ask one final time, can you truly bear the full weight of this battle?" The man's face was a pathetic mask of terror, the cold steel of my blade a mere inch from his throat. "I will ask once more," I stated, my voice devoid of any warmth. I let a small predatory smile grace my lips as I posed the simple question. "Among the people you command, who is the strongest?" From behind him, a voice full of unearned arrogance boomed. "It's me, young master." I lowered my sword slightly, turning my attention to the fool who had just volunteered. He puffed out his chest, a self-satisfied smirk plastered on his scarred face. "Young master, no one born yet can defeat me here," he declared with laughable confidence. "This imbecile dared to speak to me with such disrespect. You brat, you only got your position thanks to your family. How dare you wave a sword around?" He then had the audacity to threaten me, promising, "I'll beat you senseless." I remained perfectly still, my expression unreadable. The silence stretched, amplifying the tension, until it was a palpable force. The man I held hostage flinched as I pulled my blade back with a sharp hiss. "Kiek," he gasped, stumbling away from me. I stood before them both, my own sword now held loosely at my side. "It seems everyone here doubts my abilities," I observed coldly. "Is it because a major battle was entrusted to me, to a mere 10-year-old child without any consultation, right?" With a flick of my wrist, I slammed the point of my sword into the stone courtyard. "Well, I also doubt the abilities of the soldiers you command," I announced. I looked down on them from my elevated position on the steps. "The best way to resolve our doubts is with swords." A shadow fell across my face, my smile turning cruel. "But you see, there's a problem." I stared directly at the red-haired knight, my voice dripping with scorn. "Your so-called strongest knight is a soldier drunk on alcohol. At this point, even if I don't doubt him, isn't he proving it himself?" I leaned in, my question a venomous whisper. "Did you gain courage from drinking, by any chance?" The knight's face twitched, his arrogance finally cracking under the weight of my accusation. My loyal vassal, Vale, immediately understood my intent. "Understood, young master," he said, drawing his own blade. The drunken knight, Harbuck, finally made his move, challenging me direct. "I, Harbuck," he declared, his voice tight with false bravado. He practically spat the words, desperate to salvage his pathetic reputation. "Will prove the Baron family's sword in the name of a knight's honor." An amusing proposal, I thought, a slight smirk playing on my lips. We moved to the training grounds, his men watching from a distance. He stood across from me, a picture of overconfidence. "You must have heard about my sword, right?" I asked, testing the depths of his ignorance. He actually laughed, a grating, obnoxious sound. "I am well aware of your strange sword, young master," he sneered. "Truly fascinating. Where is this guy getting his confidence from?" I wondered internally. Does he have something he's relying on? With a battle cry, he charged forward. His blade cut through the air, aimed directly at me. I sidestepped his clumsy attack with ease. With a simple parry, I deflected his sword, the impact echoing across the field. He swung again, his expression shifting from confidence to confusion. His eyes widened in disbelief as I effortlessly met his blade. He let out a furious roar, unleashing a flurry of strikes. "You are out where I deflected every single one, my dark energy flaring around me like a storm. The clash of steel was the only sound in the dead silent yard. My eyes remained cold and focused, tracking his every predictable move. He finally realized his mistake. His blade doesn't have aura power infused in it, he thought, sweat beading on his brow. He knew that only a very small number of high-ranking knights could use an aura blade. Still, I should respond properly to someone fighting with full strength, I thought, deciding to end this farce. I planted my feet, my own power beginning to stir. A shield of pure dark magic materialized on my arm, swirling with violet energy. He froze mid-swing, utterly bewildered. "What?" The dark energy coiled and lashed out like living things. They shot past his head, unsettling him completely. His eyes wide open in sheer panic. He swung wildly, trying to cut through the shadowy constructs. "God damn it," he cursed as the phantoms dissipated and reformed. He couldn't focus, couldn't land a single blow. His attacks won't stop. He panicked. He blamed my power, calling it a damn artifact that was breaking his concentration. He lunged one last time, striking my shield with all his might. The impact was completely negated. His skill is just average, though, I noted with disappointment. Holding an orb of concentrated power, I saw the flicker of realization in his eyes just before I released it. "Huh?" A moment later, he was on his back, armor clattering, as he hit the ground with a sickening thud. His supposed lord cried out in shock. "Sitter Harbuck." I feigned concern, my voice laced with sarcasm. "Are you all right, Sir Harbuck?" Internally, I was utterly unimpressed. Are you serious? He goes down this easily? The man Lord Greenbelt rushed to his fallen knight's side. He turned on me, his face contorted with rage and disbelief. Young Master Dale, what on earth is this? He shrieked. Right before an important battle, an elite knight becomes unable to fight. I clenched my jaw, my patience finally wearing thin. Lord Greenbelt. I began, my voice dangerously low. I took a step toward him, my shadow falling over the pathetic pair. Do you not understand your situation? With that pathetic skill, our Jackson Duchy would have had to carry everything in this battle. I spat. And you intended to just watch comfortably, he stammered, unable to form a coherent response. I gestured to the wheezing fool on the ground. Is this really the strongest knight you boast about? I didn't wait for an answer. Our Jackson Duchy never hesitates to become a shield for those loyal to us. I let that statement hang in the air before delivering the killing blow. But that is not an excuse for you to neglect your own duties. He flinched as if I had struck him. Therefore, I declared, my voice ringing with absolute authority, until the battle arrives, the knights of our ducal house will become your swords. I turned to his assembled soldiers, who had watched the entire spectacle. Now make your choice. I looked from the fallen knight to his men. Will you follow me, or will you lose your livelihood? The choice was obvious. They dropped to their knees in unison. One by one, they bowed their heads in submission. Their captain spoke for them all. I swear to give my full loyalty. It was done. That night, far away in the ducal manor, my father was speaking to my mother. He found her weeping with worry. He gently held her, trying to assuage her fears. Don't worry too much, he said softly. He spoke of me with a confidence that bordered on reverence. That child possesses far more than we can even imagine. He stroked her hair, his gaze distant. When Dale grows up someday, he mused, the sights he will witness will be beyond even my imagination. A knowing smile touched his lips. Our child will one day become the ruler of this world. Meanwhile, I sat alone in my new quarters, running a hand through my hair in frustration. There's no hope, I muttered to myself. I was a frog in a well, and I realized how pathetic the world outside the well really was. They're all complete amateurs. The sacred sword master sent me here for a reason, knowing the state of this territory. If that's how they want to play, I have my own ideas. The next day arrived, bright and clear. The training grounds were filled with the sounds of exertion. Harbuk was gasping for breath, his body already at its limit. He was forced to drag a massive boulder, his supposed knightly honor in tatters. Please, I beg you, no more, he pleaded. My knight Vale was merciless. You've already collapsed, what do you plan to do now? Stand up, you weakling. I watched from a throne, completely unmoved by the scene. And you dare call yourself a knight of the north? Vale bellowed. The pathetic man could only whine about his injuries. No, I'm injured. You've barely done anything, and you're already whining, I commented dryly. I issued my first command to my loyal knight. Sir Vale, please teach the Greenbelt Barony's knights basic physical training from the ground up. Every single one of them is below standard. Yes, understood, he replied without hesitation. Then I set the next piece on the board. Also, send someone to the Pucker Barony and tell them we'd like to propose negotiations. Vale looked at me, a question in his eyes. Negotiations? Yes. This borderland between our baronies was about to become a graveyard, but they were still playing at diplomacy. I sat alone at the long table, the emptiness of the space a perfect reflection of my enemy's intellect. My advisor Lucas had laid out their situation for me before I left. At most, a few weeks, he'd said, calculating the time until their supplies ran out. He'd shown me the maps, how the famed Knights of St. Magdalena were stretched thin on a pointless expedition across the continent. His conclusion was sound. Their desperation made a preemptive strike highly likely. He even warned me not to underestimate the opposing knight forces under Baron Perker. A sensible but ultimately useless piece of advice. Just then, a guard announced the arrival of my guest. I watched as young Lord Philip and his handler stepped into the tent. A small, cruel smile touched my lips. They sent the exact two I was expecting. Philip, the arrogant fool, was a commander in name only, a puppet wrapped in fine clothes, and standing behind him the real power, Sir Milvus, with his hand resting far too close to his sword. The man postured with a grim face, trying to look intimidating. Philip started with a grating laugh, as if this meeting was some grand joke. To think we'd be holding negotiations after coming all this way, he sneered, his eyes filled with a foolish, unearned confidence. He leaned in, trying to intimidate me. Did you wet your pants before a real war, little kid? I ignored the pathetic jab and cut straight to the point. Why did you agree to my negotiation? He faltered, confused by the directness of the question. What? He stammered, his bravado cracking instantly. I am not asking you, I said, my voice cold as ice. I am not asking the puppet put forth as a figurehead for this battlefield. I looked past him, my gaze landing on the man in the back. I am asking the real commander standing over there. I let the title hang in the air for a moment. Sir Milvus, the Sword of Purity. Philip's face went white with shock. What did you say? He sputtered. I gave him a predatory smile. Isn't that right? I continued, my words dripping with condescension. Otherwise, there is no way the renowned holy swordsman would entrust the command of a battlefield to a dullard with not an ounce of talent. The pampered lord's face twisted in a mask of pure rage. Sir Milvus immediately tried to intervene, his voice sharp. Young Lord Philip, do not be swayed by his words. The so-called commander was furious that I dared speak the truth so openly. He couldn't comprehend how I knew their dirty little secret. The fact that Count Brandenburg considers his own son a disgrace is information known only to their inner circle. But how on earth did I know? I pressed my advantage, my voice a venomous whisper. How does it feel to command not a shred of trust from your respected father? Panicked Milvus declared the negotiations cancelled. Young Lord Philip, there is no reason to remain here any longer. Let us return, he barked, trying to drag his puppet away. The boy looked utterly lost, his face a mess of confusion and anger. I shall do that, he mumbled, a pathetic attempt to reclaim some authority. I leaned back in my chair. Do you need permission for even a single word? Philip flinched as if struck. Watching you bow your head to the orders of a subordinate, I mused, letting my eyes sweep over him with disdain. You look just like a slave. Is that truly the appearance of the eldest son of a count's house? It seems the dog is putting a leash on its master. Philip's face flushed a deep, ugly red. Milvus tried to speak again, but Philip finally exploded. Shut up, he shrieked at his own knight. I watched the beautiful chaos unfold, my expression placid. I wondered aloud. At this rate, I can't tell if young Lord Philip is the holy swordsman's puppet, or Sir Milvus's doll. The two of them froze, the insult hitting home with surgical precision. This was never about talking peace. It was a move to disrupt their command system from the very start. The fool had no intention of negotiating, and neither did I. Surveil, I said calmly to my guard. Please step aside for a moment. He obeyed instantly, his loyalty absolute. I turned back to the fuming brat. Shall we talk at just the two of us? I gestured to the empty table, a silent challenge. I gave him a reason his pathetic ego could latch onto. Strictly as the supreme commanders who must take responsibility for this battle. It worked perfectly. Fine, he snarled, shoving his handler aside. He sat down, trembling with rage. Back off immediately, Sir Milvus, he commanded, puffing out his chest. Do you not hear the words of the supreme commander? He yelled, a child playing soldier. Milvus looked horrified. Dealing with the brat of House Saxon is my job, Philip roared, his voice cracking. I could almost see the moment Milvus realized how thoroughly I had played them. He bowed his head in defeat. I will follow your orders. The puppet was now truly in charge, and he was about to lead them all to ruin. Thank you, young Lord Philip, I said smoothly. As I said, I requested this meeting strictly for the sake of negotiation. He narrowed his eyes. Do you have terms to persuade me? I smiled. Yes. If the Knights of St. Magdalena were to withdraw their troops from this battle right now, I began, letting the offer hang in the air. House Saxon will provide the supplies necessary for your return. He stared at me dumbfounded. What? Then the rage returned and he slammed his fists on the table. Do you dare call those conditions a negotiation? I feigned contrition. Yes, I apologize if my earlier mockery offended you, young lord. Then my voice turned to steel. But please withdraw your troops and return. If you do not, your unit will be annihilated and hundreds of knights will become prisoners. I leaned forward, my eyes boring into his. The holy swordsman's reputation, and yours, will be dragged through the mud. This is the last chance to save what little face remains. He erupted in a crazed laugh. Indeed, Sir Milvus was right, he shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. You only intended to mock me from the start. I sighed, clasping my hands together. That is regrettable. He looked confused, the gears in his simple mind grinding to a halt. What? Aren't you afraid? I asked him. The person who loses this battle and eventually bears the responsibility for the defeat won't be Commander Sir Milvus. My smile was devoid of all warmth, but the incompetent and utterly useless eldest son of the Count's house. An image of his stern, disappointed father flashed in his mind, and he flinched. Don't make me laugh, he spat, trying to regain his composure. He stood, kicking his chair back. A brat like you won't be able to act so relaxed for much longer. I simply watched him storm out. I hope you keep that confidence for a long time. A short while after the negotiations predictably broke down, Philip was already playing war chief from the walls of his barony. He stared out at my lands, trying to project an aura of command. How are the enemy movements? He demanded. His scout dutifully reported that my forces were on the move. But Sir Milvus now watched with new eyes. He finally understood that my composure was not the mark of a beginner. He realized I am not an opponent to be underestimated just because I am a 10-year-old child. He saw an opportunity. While I still remained a 10-year-old child, he believed he had to cut off that sprout. I must cut off that sprout, he vowed, drawing his sword. He rallied his men with a pathetic war cry. Teach silence to the child who is all talk. At that exact moment, my own scout galloped up to my position. Young Lord Dale, I smiled. They took the bait. Well done. I drew my own blade, its dark steel humming in my hand. Swords of House Saxon, I roared, my voice carrying across the ranks of my loyal knights. My crest gleamed on my armor. Today let us show them blood worthy of that name. My men roared in response, a wave of disciplined fury, ready to be unleashed. My enemies charged forward with the misplaced confidence of fools who believe screaming makes them stronger. Their commander, a man named Milbus, laid out his grand strategy on a map, utterly convinced of his own genius. He admitted he couldn't gauge the true power of my Night Raven knights, which should have been his first clue to turn back. Therefore, he declared with unearned gravity, to prepare for any unexpected events, his brilliant solution was to hide the pampered young Master Philip in the center, away from any real danger. He then assigned Baron Pucker's cannon fodder to the left flank, a pathetic attempt to stall my advance. Meanwhile, his so-called elite forces under his direct command would swing around to attack my knights from the side. He actually believed this textbook maneuver would be enough to halt me, shouting that they couldn't miss this chance. With a battle cry that was more desperation than valor, he led the charge himself. His men were already being slaughtered on the cliffs, their bodies tumbling down like discarded stones. One of them had the presence of mind to yell, "It's dangerous," a stunningly obvious observation. Another one of his loyal dogs screamed about dying for his count's family as he charged forward. He raised his sword, a perfect picture of feudal bravery. My knight met his pathetic attack without even slowing his horse. The impact was absolute. The Brandenburg soldier's shield didn't just break, it exploded into splinters. His face was a perfect mask of shock, the last expression he would ever have. His comrades were just as stunned by the sheer power difference between us. It was then that I decided to make my appearance, trotting my warhorse through the carnage. I looked down at the terrified soldier, his sword shaking, and told him plainly, "Things won't go the way you want." He stared blankly, processing the fact that he was still breathing. The fool actually stammered, I'm alive." My name rippled through their ranks like a death knell. "It's young Master Dale." They whispered in horror that I had personally come to the front line. I ignored them and addressed my own men, my voice cutting through the din of battle. "Everyone, don't fall back, fight to the end." They needed no further encouragement. I spurred my mount forward, leading the charge for the glory of the Jackson Duchy. My Night Raven knights fell in behind me, a wave of black steel and silent fury. We tore through their formation as if it were paper. Milbus watched me from afar, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "So you plan to settle this with the main forces clashing from the start," he mused, as if he were watching a chess match. He called me no ordinary kid for throwing myself out as bait. A smug, disgusting smile crept across his face as he concluded, "But that's exactly what I wanted." He truly believed I had fallen for his simple-minded trap. He screamed for his goddess as he led his own charge. His knights roared about their loyalty to the House of Brandenburg. The two forces galloped toward one another, a storm of dust and steel. The ground itself trembled from the weight of their doomed charge. My man Logan gave the order to my personal guard, "Do not let a single person reach the young master." Then he roared to the rest of our forces, "All forces, charge!" The command was absolute. In response, my knights unleashed their aura, their lances glowing with an ethereal light. It was a power these fools had never witnessed before. The moment our lines met, a shockwave of violent energy erupted across the field. Their vanguard was annihilated in an instant, their bodies and horses sent flying. Milbus could only watch in open-mouthed horror as his elite cavalry was shattered. "Quick and decisive," he bellowed, trying to salvage his crumbling plan. "First Cavalry, follow me." He spurred his horse onward, still clinging to the delusion that he could win. "We'll defeat young Master Dale and end this battle," he screamed, aiming for me directly. He demanded his men prove their worth as elites, a title they were quickly disgracing. His voice was tight with panic. He swung his sword at one of my knights, a desperate attempt to regain momentum. The blade met nothing but air as my soldier easily dodged the telegraphed attack. My man let out a ferocious battle cry as he countered. Milbus's eyes widened, shocked that a common soldier could match him. Another of my knights intercepted him, the blade of his weapon whistling past the commander's throat. The near miss was a clear warning. His attack was blocked with such force that it nearly threw him from his saddle. He struggled to keep his seat, his arm trembling from the impact. He was completely off balance, his perfect form shattered. Another sword was already swinging for his head, forcing him to duck wildly. He grit his teeth, finally realizing he was trapped between warriors far beyond his caliber. A knight cloaked in a dark aura swung down, aiming to cleave him in two. He was forced into a desperate retreat, pulling his horse back from the slaughter. Looking over his shoulder, he saw my forces tearing through his men with an unnatural energy, the cold dread of a predator who has just realized he is the prey washed over him. "What? Something's wrong," he muttered, his mind finally catching up to reality. His own men were voicing their confusion, wondering how they were overwhelming my elite forces so easily. They saw my knights pulling back and thought it was a retreat, a fatal error in judgment. They questioned the very reputation of my black cavalry, the fools. Milbus was sweating now, that strange feeling finally coalescing into pure terror. Just then a messenger galloped up, his face pale. "Message from the front, Commander." He didn't even wait for permission to speak. "Baron Pucker on the left flank is being completely overwhelmed," he cried out. Milbus's face went white. "What? The left flank?" Over on that very flank, Baron Pucker was screaming for his life. It was a pathetic, high-pitched shriek. My commander Ron sneered from his horse. "How are those Greenbelt idiots using aura right now?" he finished, watching the enemy line collapse. Their intelligence was fatally flawed, and they were paying the price in blood. The news reached young Master Philip, the coward they'd hidden in the center. "A request for aid has come from Baron Pucker's left flank." The messenger continued. "The Jackson Duchy's aura knights are breaking through his lines." Philip stared in disbelief, surrounded by his terrified guards. "Impossible," he whispered. "How did all the aura knights get way over there?" His men pleaded with him. "Young master, what will you do?" All he could think about was the shame of failure, how the blame would fall on the useless heir. The fear of his father's disappointment was written all over his face, but that fear quickly curdled into a foolish rage. "You think I'll let things go the way that Brat wants?" Just then, Milbus's order arrived. "Reinforce the left flank." "Silence!" Philip screamed, his composure completely gone. He violently shoved the messenger aside. Have all rear cavalry join me, he commanded, making the single worst decision of his short life. We're breaking through the right flank. He was going to abandon his allies to chase personal glory. Before the left collapses, I'll kill that damned brat Dale. What an ambitious little fool. When Milbas heard the news, he was dumbfounded. Commander, the young master is leading the rear cavalry this way. What? Milbas roared, his face contorting with rage. I told him to save the left flank. That cursed brat. He finally saw the whole chessboard. Our right flank was already winning against their weak left. The force I had sent as bait. Sending more troops there would be a useless, clumsy gesture. But that idiot is blinded by the idea of striking the enemy commander. Milbas realized, far too late. The boy's ego was about to cost them everything. He had ignored a direct order and the pleas of a dying ally, a catastrophic mistake. The pieces were all in place. At this rate, their left flank would be annihilated, and my forces would swing around, surrounding them completely. Commander, we must retreat now, his men begged, their bravado gone. But Milbas hesitated, staring across the field at me. No, not yet. He refused to accept his utter defeat. He couldn't stand the sight of my calm demeanor. The battle isn't over yet, he growled to himself, watching me. He saw the look in my eyes, the quiet confidence of a man who had already won. I'll break it, he vowed, his pride demanding one last suicidal gesture. He raised his sword high. It gleamed under the harsh sun, a final flicker of defiance. 1st Cavalry Battalion, he roared to the few elites he had left. They gathered around him, ready to die for his foolishness. There's only one way out, his lieutenant cried. Give us the order, they pleaded, begging for a glorious death. Milbas lowered his sword and began to pray, a final ritual before the end. In the name of Saint Magdalena, he began, his voice heavy. His knights echoed the prayer. May the pure white blade be blessed. May the goddess Sistina's protection be with us, he murmured, eyes closed. And may the sister goddess's love and mercy be with us. His eyes snapped open, blazing with a maniacal light. Break through the enemy lines and bring me the enemy commander's head. Raise your swords and follow me. With that they charged, a pitifully small force riding straight into the jaws of my perfectly laid trap. They were already dead. They just didn't know it yet. The fool on the horse bellows for his men to raise their swords and follow him. Sir Milbas, the so-called Holy Knight, leads his cavalry in a predictable, headlong charge. The ground trembles under the weight of their advance, a symphony of their own impending doom. They scream prayers for a saint who has long abandoned them. I watch from my steed, perfectly still, as the pieces of my board move exactly where I want them. He's finally chasing, just as I knew he would. A slight tug on the reins is all it takes to begin the next phase of his humiliation. It's a common mistake for those on the front lines. Their vision always narrows to a single point. He sees only me, his mind consumed by the arrogant belief that a single decisive strike will win this war. And so I give him the target he so desperately craves, drawing my ethereal bow. The pressure and anxiety of battle always cloud judgment, especially for men who rely on faith instead of intellect. I can see the confusion already dawning on Sir Milbas's face. This isn't going according to his doctrine. He sees the shimmering arrow knocked on my bow and can only gasp, "Magic?" A pitying smirk plays on my lips as I channel my power into a single perfect ice bullet. Is this truly the first time he's witnessed power that doesn't come from swinging a heavy piece of steel? I let the arrow of frozen mana fly. It cuts through the air, a whisper of the winter that is about to descend upon his forces. The projectile finds its mark in one of his vanguard knights with flawless precision. The man is thrown from his saddle before he can even process the shard of ice blooming in his chest. Sir Milbas can only stare, his mind struggling to comprehend such accuracy from a galloping horse. He mumbles about the surprising nature of the magic, but he hasn't even begun to see what I'm capable of. He's correct that it requires a perfect harmony of horsemanship and archery, a harmony that a brute like him could never hope to imitate. But that was just a distraction. Now for the main event. Pour forth. I command the mana around me. I raise my hand, calling upon the very elements to obey my will. A wall of ice, I declare, and the ground itself splits open. A colossal barrier of jagged ice erupts from the earth, sealing their path completely. Their glorious charge grinds to a pathetic, confused halt. One of his men shouts the obvious, that their path is blocked by an ice wall. Their formation is shattered, their momentum gone. Now is the time. I roar, seizing the perfect moment. This is the turning point I engineered. I give the order to my hidden forces. All forces, counterattack. My knights surge from the flanks, a wave of black steel crashing into their disorganized ranks. One of my lieutenants cries out for the men to protect me. They form a living shield around me, a testament to their loyalty. Their charge is relentless, a brutal display of calculated violence. The holy knights, once so confident, are now trapped in a pincer, fighting for their lives. My forces tear through their lines with brutal efficiency. The battlefield descends into a beautiful chaos of my own making. From his useless vantage point, Milbas finally understands. He realizes with dawning horror that he's been completely outplayed. Their objective wasn't to defeat him in a direct clash, but to stall and surround him. To make matters worse, that arrogant fool Lord Philip made the worst possible move, breaking formation to chase a phantom. His mistake was the critical vulnerability I needed. As his central forces became overcrowded and tangled, his entire line became twisted and weak. Their proud battle formation was now nothing more than a panicked mob. Milbas can only scream "damn it" at the sky as his army collapses around him. He knows there's only one method remaining for a cornered animal. He gathers his aura, preparing for a final desperate charge. With a pathetic roar, he unleashes his power, shattering a section of my ice wall. He gallops through the breach, his eyes locked on me. "This is the end, Lord Dale," he screams. A truly delusional statement. He deludes himself into thinking he will deal with me personally. I simply watch his approach, a predator waiting for its exhausted prey to make one last mistake. His attack is blocked, his grand charge ending in an anticlimactic failure. The battle is over. Milbus is on his knees, his precious knights captured or dead, all of them surrounded by my forces. I calmly dismount and approach the defeated commander. It seems the habit of overestimating the power of an aura knight is still there. I tell him coldly, their vaunted combat doctrine becomes their most fatal weakness when facing an opponent who can actually think. In my past life, the man I served was the Holy Swordsman, who led this very knight order. Because of that, whether I liked it or not, I saw everything about them. I know their strategies, their weaknesses, their very souls as clearly as I see the palm of my own hand. A soldier rides up to me. "Lord Dale, Baron Greenbelt's knights have broken through the left wing. We have also captured the commander of the left wing, Baron Parker," he adds. Milbus grits his teeth, cursing the name of the fool who cost him everything. "It seems Lord Philip didn't trust you very much," I say, twisting the knife. He looks up at me, the gears finally turning in his thick skull. "Did you set a trap to lure us in from the beginning?" I offer him a smile that promises nothing but pain. The battlefield is always chaotic, and no one can predict the future. Bringing destruction upon oneself amidst repeated chaos is ultimately one's own foolishness. I gesture to his captured knights, kneeling in the dirt. Following the Empire's great tradition, I begin, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "We show mercy to those who beg for their lives with a few gold coins." I look them in the eyes, one by one. "Will you also beg for your lives?" One of them finds a sliver of courage and shouts, "Don't be ridiculous. Rather than beg, I would sooner die right here," he declares with pathetic bravado. I raise an eyebrow, a cruel smile spreading across my face. "Then you must die." Before the words even fully leave my mouth, one of my men steps forward and runs him through. I turn my gaze back to the commander. "What will you do, Sir Milbus?" His remaining knights tremble, their foolish pride evaporating in an instant. My general simply awaits my command. Milbus thinks to himself that his only regret is not being able to warn the others about the monster standing before him. "That's right, you should be afraid." He finally understands the gravity of his situation and bellows, "Everyone, kneel." The once proud holy knight prostrates himself before me. "We surrender according to imperial tradition and demand fair treatment as prisoners of war," he pleads. I look down at him, letting the silence hang in the air. "You are willing to kneel and beg for your lives," I state flatly. He insists that any further provocation would be meaningless. "No." His eyes widen in pure shock. I give him a bright, cheerful smile. "There are no survivors here." The last shred of hope dies in his eyes. My voice is calm, my order absolute. Even my own men, the hardened Night Crow Knights, gasp at the command. They know that according to imperial custom, ransoming captured knights is the normal procedure, but my voice was adamant. My command is law, and they obey without question, beginning the slaughter. The sounds of execution fill the air, a final brutal end to the battle. I watch impassively as the last of his men are cut down. My word is more absolute than any imperial tradition. But Milbus, ever the fool, decides to bring about his own destruction. He snarls, trying to rise. A pathetic final gesture. He doesn't even make it 2 steps before my guards intercept him. They drive their spears through his body, pinning him to the blood-soaked ground. I walk over to his dying form and kneel beside him. I lean in close, my voice a soft whisper against his ear. "Sir Milbus, do you remember my death?" He can only stare, confused and bleeding out. "That night," I continue, letting the memory surface. "I remember your face being there. I remember as your lord plunged a blade into my back, betraying me. I remember him standing over my dying body, surrounded by his loyal dogs. I remember falling, the life draining from my eyes, and you were there as well, watching with that same smug look on your face. You stood by and did nothing." I lean in even closer, my breath ghosting over his skin. "I ask you again, young knight, do you remember my death?" The blood drains from his face as comprehension finally, horribly, dawns. "Did you manage to come back to life, you terrible bastard?" A dark, swirling aura of pure vengeance erupts from my body, enveloping us both. The man who is now experiencing a terror beyond his comprehension. "Yes." A genuine, satisfied smile spreads across my face as blood splatters my cheek. Finally, I feel a little relieved. The sound of my cavalry shattering their lines was music to my ears, but this part required a more personal touch. My knight, Aaliyah, slammed the pommel of her sword into the chest of one of their last standing officers. He went flying, a pathetic wheeze escaping his lips as his armor crumpled from the force of the blow. The fool landed in a heap, his war officially over. Their commander, the so-called young Master Philip, could only stare in wide-eyed horror. He was finally realizing the totality of his failure, that his forces had been utterly dismantled before he even knew what was happening. His right-wing cavalry was nothing more than trampled corpses and broken steel. His precious Aura Knights, led by their vaunted Sir Milbus, were all dead. His left flank had been breached an eternity ago, and my black cavalry was now a tightening noose around his core forces. Damn it, he muttered, clutching his head like a frightened child. I'm sure the memory of my gaze was haunting him, that smile I gave him before the slaughter began. He was breaking, the pressure of his own incompetence crushing him from within. Why do they keep coming back to me? He whimpered, a commander completely lost. His men, desperate for any semblance of leadership, pleaded with him to make a decision. The boy was frozen, trapped in his own nightmare. I can't lose like this, he mumbled, his subordinate looking back in confusion. What did you say? The man asked, hoping for an order. And then a spark of idiotic pride ignited in Philip's eyes as he screamed for everyone to fight to the end. Do not retreat, he bellowed. A grand speech for an audience of dead men. Our night order will never kneel. One of his men, possessing a single shred of sense, tried to warn him of their inevitable annihilation. But Philip, high on his own delusion, silenced him with the weight of his title. Charge, final charge, he shrieked, ordering his men to their graves. The look in his eyes was one of pure, unadulterated madness. As his men cried out his name in alarm, he spurred his horse forward into a suicidal rush. But his grand finale was cut short as I personally moved to intercept him. My blade blocked his path, a simple, immovable object against his pathetic, desperate force. Stop him and protect me, he screamed to his men, his bravado evaporating in an instant. In what he thought were his final moments, his mind didn't turn to honor or duty, but to cheap wine and women. He lamented a life of hedonism cut short, wishing he could die on a battlefield like a true knight. I granted him the battlefield, but I would deny him the death of a warrior. I reached out and tore him from his saddle. With a grunt, I threw him from his horse and onto the cold, hard earth. My soldiers immediately moved in, their spears forming a cage around the fallen commander. I stepped forward, my boots landing with a quiet thud that sealed his fate. My adjutant couldn't help but praise the outcome. Everything is going exactly according to your plan, as expected of you, young Master Dale, he declared, as Philip squirmed and yelled to be released. I looked down at him, this supposed noble, groveling in the dirt. It seems you really hate surrendering, I observed with cold amusement. He glared at me, his face a mask of sweat and impotent rage. His hands, now bound, could do nothing. He tried to salvage some pride, spitting. You may win this battle, but we did not accept defeat, I scoffed. For someone who ran away just to save himself, those are pretty bold words. He puffed out his chest, trying a different lie. I turned my back on his performance, utterly bored. Ah, is that so? Then since the battle is over, I said, my sword flashing into view, there's no need for you to stay alive. The color drained from his face as he screamed for me to wait. In a final desperate gamble, he yelled, fine, I will gladly accept your duel proposal. He actually tried to frame it as his own choice, a formal challenge to decide the battle's fate. Helmet scoffed at the sheer audacity. They're nonsense. I silenced him with a hand. It's fine. Facing the pathetic worm, I gave my consent. All right. I made it official. I'll accept the duel. A triumphant smirk crept across his face. The fool actually thought he had found a way out. He believed he'd found an opening to exploit. He envisioned my death at his hands, a glorious reversal of his fortune. Hey, I knew you'd accept, he thought, his arrogance returning in full force. His smug grin was truly revolting. You unbearably arrogant brat, he screamed, lunging at me with his sword. But his blade never reached me. My shadows writhed to life, solidifying around my hand. I stopped his full-force strike with my bare, shadow-clad palm. His eyes widened in absolute shock. What he was seeing was impossible. He could only stammer, his mind unable to process what was happening. His stammering turned into a piercing shriek of agony. The shadows covering my hand lashed out, enveloping his arm and crushing it from the inside. He collapsed, the last of his pride shattering, as he began to grovel and beg for his life. I watched his pathetic display, my face a mask of indifference. You really can't show any dignity to the very end, I stated flatly. And so a war that began with arrogant boasting ended with a ridiculous, pitiful scream. The return journey was met with the sound of celebratory trumpets. The common folk cheered as I rode through the main gate. I was the conquering hero, the young master who had returned victorious. The rumors of my strategy had already spread like wildfire. They spoke of an ultimate encirclement, of countless enemy corpses. It was all just a means to an end, but not everyone was celebrating. In the shadows, a man in clerical robes listened to the gossip. He questioned the morality of my actions, wondering if this was truly God's will. He understood my nature perfectly. That child's blade is pointed at enemies for now. This man was Nikolai, cardinal of the church of the goddess Sistina, and he correctly predicted that someday my blade would not hesitate to strike down allies. As I entered the main hall of the ducal castle, the celebrations faded behind me. A small voice called out to me. Big brother, my armor, stained with the dust of the battlefield, felt heavy and out of place here. My little sister Lise ran to me with a brilliant smile. She threw her arms around my waist. Big brother Dale, I picked her up, a rare, genuine warmth breaking through my cold exterior. Did you miss me a lot? She hugged me tightly, burying her face in my shoulder. Yeah, I missed you a lot. Sir Helmet stood by, offering his formal congratulations on my first victory. I gave him a small smile. I walked further into the hall, my sister's small hand in mine. She was a point of calm in the storm of my life. My mother and her attendants were waiting. I approached the dais and knelt before my father, the Duke, and my mother. It was time to make my formal report. With my hand over my heart, I spoke. Dale of Jackson, here I formally report our victory to His Grace the Duke. My father nodded, his expression stern but satisfied. You led the victory splendidly. I gave the proper humble response. This victory was only possible because of the swords of the Jackson Duchy. My retainer, Vale, gave Helmut a nod of thanks for his guidance during the campaign. My mother's voice was soft. You must be tired from just returning from battle. Her smile was a comforting sight. Get plenty of rest first, she insisted. I bowed my head. Thank you, mother. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel at ease. This was a fortress of a different kind. My parents watched me go, relieved to have their family back together. It felt strangely enough like coming home. But for the family of my enemy, there was no such peace. Count Magdalena clenched his fists in fury. He had already received the news. Two of the few survivors, bandaged and broken, shuffled into his study. Where is Philip? The Count demanded. And why are only you left? The man trembled as he delivered the grim report of our total victory and their utter annihilation. He then explained that Philip was my captive and that I was demanding a massive ransom for his pathetic life. The survivors watched their lord, bracing for his reaction. The Count's voice was dangerously calm. I see. Then his fury erupted. So you were utterly defeated and shamelessly ran away to survive? The men flinched back in terror. He loomed over them, his eyes burning with hate. Are you prepared for the consequences of running away? They fell to their knees, begging for a forgiveness they would never receive. Take them to the basement, the Count ordered his guards, his voice dripping with venom. Make them beg to be killed instead. As the cowards were dragged away screaming, the Count was left to stew in his humiliation. The battle became a legend, a turning point whispered about in halls of power. And I earned a new name, a name born from the fear of my enemies and the cold efficiency of my methods. I came to be known as the Black Prince, the commander who showed no mercy. Time passed, and on my 11th birthday, my life took another significant turn. My father summoned me, telling me he had a gift. At my official birthday ceremony, he made a stunning announcement. He would appoint me as a Viscount of the Jackson Duchy. I was surprised, to say the least. A Viscount held real authority, the power to act as the Lord's direct representative. With this, my father had fulfilled his promise to treat me as an equal, a true partner in leading our house. Thank you, father, I said, bowing respectfully. Since you have said so, I began, seizing the opportunity. There is something I wish to do as your representative. He listened, his curiosity piqued. What is it? I laid out the political reality we faced. People say that on the battlefield, the Black Prince showed a cruelty that left no survivors. Knights who fought under the banner of the goddess church were all cut down. I looked him in the eye, making the problem clear. The church will not look kindly upon this. And then I presented my solution, the next move in my grand strategy. So I wished to depart on a papal pilgrimage to the papal state of Sistina. I smiled, knowing this was a move he couldn't possibly refuse. There, I will face the so-called infamy I have cultivated. It's the perfect cover story. My father's eyes narrow, his expression a mask of stone-cold disapproval. He remains silent for a long moment, studying me. I can't understand it, he finally says, his voice a low growl of disbelief. Fear is a great asset that cannot be exchanged for anything else. And yet you plan to cater to the church, he asks, seeing through my facade. I just continue to smile, letting his words hang in the air. He sighs, knowing I'm not to be underestimated, and asks if I have a plan in mind. Yes, that's right, I reply, my voice unwavering. I intend to make them an offer they cannot refuse. And while I'm at it, I add with a glint in my eye, I'll also obtain some forbidden grimoires. My ambitions are my own, forged not in some summoning circle, but in the fires of a recurring nightmare. Even now I can feel the cold dread of that memory clawing at me in my sleep. A voice from the abyss whispers a single question that echoes in my soul. A skeletal apparition looms over me, its empty sockets burning with a cold purple light. Do you remember my death? It hisses, its bony fingers reaching for my throat. I remember our deaths, I grit out, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Memento mori, remember death. The phantom pain of a fatal blow erupts in my chest, a sensation I've relived 1,000 times. I collapse, clutching at the wound that isn't there. My eyes snap open, the phantom agony still fresh as I gasp for air. It was just a nightmare, but it's a constant reminder of my past life's failure. My mindscape, the abyss of thought, is the source of this power and this torment. It is the darkest scenery of the mind, a place one must reach to master the third circle of magic. Controlling one's inner world is the foundation of a mage's power, but being tormented by loneliness and nightmares from that world is nothing short of pathetic. I am still lacking. To fully control my mindscape, I need greater power. Just as a knight is nothing without his sword, a great mage is nothing without a grimoire, and I intend to claim the most powerful ones in existence. Our journey begins, the carriage rolling past the lush forest outside my family's domain. We travel toward the border between the Greenbelt Barony and the Pucker Barony, a lawless region ripe for opportunity. It's a place beyond the Duke of Jackson's reach, a perfect den for snakes. For Baron Pucker, who lost his battle against my family, there was only one choice left. Banditry. His men shout the order to fire, their pathetic attempt at an ambush already in motion. A volley of arrows rains down from the trees. How dare you try to pass through Baron Pucker's land without permission, one of them yells, as if they hold any real authority here. They surround our carriage, their weapons drawn, confident in their numbers. What is it that you want? Varan asks, his voice utterly devoid of emotion. The leader of these thugs, a man with a smug grin, looks down at us from his horse. Isn't it common sense to pay a toll when entering a noble's land? He sneers. Varan remains silent for a moment, letting the fool savor his brief moment of power. Understood, he says, his voice calm. We happen to prepare a certain amount to pay the toll. The bandit leader smirks, clearly pleased with our compliance. Looks like you know how things work, he says condescendingly. Varan presents them with a heavy bag of gold. Hey, that's quite a hefty toll. The bandit laughs, his eyes gleaming with greed. Fine, seeing your sincerity, I'll let you pass this time. As we begin to move, he calls out one last time. I'll be expecting the same next time. He. The fools ride off cackling amongst themselves. They think they've just pulled off a simple robbery. Our carriage continues down the path, the trap now perfectly set. Stop right there. Another voice booms from a cliff overlooking the road. Baron Pucker is passing through. A man with a ridiculous mustache and an even more ridiculous sense of self-importance appears with his cronies. Show proper respect before the Baron, his man shouts. The Baron himself steps forward, axe in hand, trying to look intimidating. How dare you pass through my territory without paying the toll? A toll, you say? Varan asks calmly. We paid that fee to your subordinate just moments ago. I lean forward slightly, adding my own question. Is it not illegal to collect tolls more than once within the same territory? The men who took our gold just laugh. You paid already? What kind of nonsense are you spouting in broad daylight? We only just met, didn't we? Their acting is atrocious, but their greed is palpable. Of course, we are people who follow imperial law more than anyone, the Baron declares with a smug grin. His man chimes in. This man is the one who survived to the very end of the famous black and white turning, the hero of reversal, Baron Pucker. A laugh escapes my lips, low and cold. Hero of reversal, huh? I murmur, my voice dripping with amusement. I adjust the clasp on my cloak. That's quite different from what I remember. The Baron's smug expression instantly dissolves into confusion and dawning horror. Don't tell me, Varan says loudly, pulling back my hood for the grand reveal. I let my hood fall, my gaze locking onto the pathetic Baron. Young Master Dale, he stammers, his face turning ghostly white. Don't panic. His men, however, are far too stupid to understand their predicament. There are only two of them, just two. This is a fight we can win, one of them shouts, rallying the other fools. Archers, take aim. Varan turns to me, awaiting his command. Please give the order, young Master Dale. I look at the insects before me and give the only order that matters. Yes, the act ends here. Kill them all. Fire, the Baron screams, his voice cracking with desperation. A swarm of arrows flies towards us, a final futile gesture. Varan doesn't even flinch, simply drawing his massive blade and swinging it in a lazy arc that knocks every single arrow out of the air. We will obey the order, he says, dark energy coiling around him and his weapon. The archers can only stare in disbelief as their attack is rendered useless. Before they can react, Varan is upon them, a phantom of death moving through their ranks. He brings his blade down, and the bandit's scream of "my arm" is cut short. Varan's face is a mask of cold efficiency. He moves like a whirlwind of destruction, his dark blade reaping life with every swing. The hero Baron Pucker can only watch in terror as his men are butchered. Please, spare me. He falls to his knees before me, groveling in the dirt. Young master, please forgive me. I swear my lifelong loyalty. He begs for the mercy of the goddesses, his words a pathetic, desperate prayer. I just smiled down at him. Why would I? The realization that his life is forfeit dawns on his face, twisting his features into a mask of pure despair. And so after dealing with countless other petty nobles and rogue knights, I continued my journey across the central continent. A few weeks later, we finally arrive at our destination. We finally arrived, young master. Varan announces from the front of our boat. Before us, rising like a monument to arrogance, is the papal state of Sistina. They call it the Celestial Seat City, Vasil. What a joke. I told the old man I came for a pilgrimage. But in truth, a word like judgment fits my purpose here much better. I arrived at the Apostolic Palace, the supposed holy sanctuary of the goddess church. Inside, a man sat upon a throne as if he were a king, basking in the light filtering through stained glass. My attendant, ever the professional, offered the standard greetings to this pompous fool, His Eminence, Cardinal Nikolai Makia, one of the church's 12 shining pillars, a sixth circle white mage, a man whose power was only exceeded by his hypocrisy. I kept my expression neutral, my hand resting on the artifact that concealed my true nature. He began with the expected platitudes, his voice oozing false sympathy, as he spoke of the immense blood spilled in my recent battle. He even had the gall to call the death of his pawns regrettable news, as if their lives meant anything to him. I played my part perfectly, lowering my head and spinning a tale of guilt. Because of my insufficient judgment, I ended up causing unnecessary sacrifices. To sell the lie, I threw myself to my knees in a grand display of feigned anguish, claiming I was on a holy pilgrimage to atone. The cardinal's smug expression told me everything. He saw a broken, guilt-ridden child, ripe for manipulation. His thoughts were practically written on his face. A genius, I might be, but in the end I was just an 11-year-old brat. He smiled, believing my manufactured guilt worked perfectly to his advantage. The goddess's mercy is open to everyone, he crooned, offering absolution. There are no sins in this world that cannot be washed away. I looked up, my voice cold and sharp. You say there are no sins that cannot be washed away? He nodded, oblivious. Yes, of course. I rose to my feet, the charade over. Then did you sell the goddess's nation to the empire? For the first time his sanctimonious mask cracked, his body jolting as if struck. He forced a strained laugh, trying to dismiss it as a poor joke. I pressed on, laying out the ugly truth. I heard that 12 cardinals, you among them, tried to persuade the former pope to accept the empire's annexation. The old pope, a man with a spine, rejected their treasonous treaty until his very last breath, and for his defiance, one of his own men stabbed him in the back. Through the betrayal of the White Tower's bishops, I stated, my voice echoing in the hall, the pope was eliminated by the empire's hounds. I let the image of his predecessor's corpse hang in the air between us. The sins of your eminence, who sold out his own country, I began, letting the accusation settle. The cardinal's face twisted into a snarl, his composure finally shattered. Holy power, corrupted by his rage, began to flare around his throne. You spoke of atonement, he spat, yet you dare speak forbidden truths with that same mouth. Do you believe the goddess's mercy stands by your side? He roared, as if his divine connection was anything but a farce. He assumed this was simple revenge. Do you think killing a mere representative will silence this? I met his pathetic display of power with my own. His Grace the Duke did not send me to dig up the church's shame. I offered him an out, a lie wrapped in a threat. What we seek is simply the price of a small silence. Of course, the Duke had no idea I was here. This was my own private war. The cardinal's anger was now mixed with confusion, his mind reeling. He was trapped, and he knew it. Defeated, he finally asked the real question, what is it that you want? A smirk finally touched my lips. He was mine. Beneath this palace is a secret archive, a prison for the church's forbidden books. His eyes widened in horror. Grant me permission to access the library of hell. My goal was singular, to find the most terrifying grimoire in existence. The Book of the Black Goat. The deal was struck, and the path to that cursed library was open to me. Now with a lantern in hand I descended into the suffocating darkness below the palace. His terms were simple. Only you, young master, may enter the library of hell, and no matter what happens, he had warned, the church will not interfere. There was one final condition. You may bring back only one grimoire. Anything else is not permitted, he'd said, his authority absolute. In exchange I swore an oath. You must swear eternal silence about the church's secrets. I bowed my head, my voice ringing with false sincerity. As the heir of the Black Duke, I swear it in the name of Jackson. To seal our pact, he invoked a binding magic, a an unbreakable contract of the White Tower. A spectral angel manifested, bearing witness to our mutual blackmail. We will use both your heart and mine as collateral, he declared. And just like that, the cardinal and I formed a pact, our very lives hanging in the balance. A chain of light wrapped itself around the ethereal image of my heart, a constant, deadly reminder. There was no room for doubt now. If either of us breaks the contract, the geas will instantly crush our hearts. A perfectly balanced equation of distrust. Finally, I stood before the entrance, a massive set of double doors. The gate of hell. An ancient warning was carved into the stone above. Abandon all hope, ye who enter here. I felt a flicker of something, not fear, but a cold, thrilling anticipation. I pushed the doors inward, the sound of grinding stone echoing into the abyss beyond. My eyes scanned the vast, dark chamber before me. I understood immediately why this place was called hell. It was less a library and more a massive sealed dungeon. Every book on these shelves was a sealed artifact, an uncontrollable disaster waiting to be unleashed. But for a mage, a powerful grimoire is a weapon of unimaginable worth. The desire to obtain one, regardless of the danger, is an instinct I fully embrace. My senses screamed a warning as I felt multiple presences emerge from the shadows. A squad of animated suits of armor, the library's guardians, moved to intercept me. How typical of the church, preaching of light while using undead puppets just like the Black Tower. They charged forward, their movements stiff and predictable. I weaved between them effortlessly, my own shadows clinging to my feet. Their holy enchantments were a joke, dissolving into nothingness against my dark magic. With no witnesses, there was no longer any reason to restrain myself. I smiled, feeling the exhilarating rush of my true power. Shadow bullet, I whispered, unleashing a volley of dark projectiles that tore through the guardians like paper. It felt refreshing to finally cut loose, as the last of them clattered to the floor in a heap of metal. Now back to business. I sliced my palm open with a dagger. I am Dale of Jackson, I announced to the silent, watching books. The rightful heir of the lineage that inherits the blood of the immortal Duke declares this here. I began the chant, O Black Goat of the Forest, who commands 1,000 offspring. Holding my bleeding hand aloft, I issued my demand. Fulfill the contract you made with the Dark Clan, and reveal yourself before me. 1,000 demonic voices shrieked inside my mind, all crying out for one thing, fresh Archmage blood. The entire library began to shake as the ancient powers within awakened. He wants to make a contract with us. They clamored for my attention, promising me the world. Shield, come here. I'll give you power. Another voice roared over the din, possessive and furious. Move! That child is my contractor. Amidst the chaos, I could feel it, the overwhelming presence I had come for. The stone walls of the library dissolved away, replaced by a crimson hellscape. The entity could sense the darkness within me, that hatred and killing intent, the scent of slaughter. I found myself standing in a world made of blood and corpses. A hooded figure materialized from the carnage, its offer simple and direct. Make a contract with me. I will hold a festival of corpses and blood from those who stand in your way, it promised, its voice the sound of 1,000 dying screams. This creature, this echo of a forgotten grimoire, made a grand promise. I will slaughter all of your enemies, it vowed. It stood before me, a caricature of power in a world of blood that it had created. I'll hold a festival of corpses and blood from those who stand in your way, it continued, as if that were some grand prize. I merely listened, unimpressed by the theatrics. I found myself standing on the surface of a crimson lake, surrounded by the remnants of souls this book had consumed. This was the mindscape of the Book of Massacre, a tome dedicated to the art of slaughter. Its power was supposed to be legendary, its value beyond measure, but it was still just a tool, and a tool has no right to make demands of its master. Step back, I ordered. The hooded figure tightened its grip on its scythe, its subservient act vanishing. You are not what I'm looking for, it growled, its red eyes flaring with indignation. It lunged, swinging its massive weapon with pathetic fury. You dare reject me, it shrieked, its voice echoing in this pathetic little world. And you think you can leave this place alive? A smirk touched my lips. It was almost amusing how little it understood. It's not impossible, I replied, my voice cutting through its tantrum. I let a fraction of my own aura leak out, and the force of it sent the creature staggering back. It stumbled, its weapon clattering against the blood-soaked ground. This is merely a world inside a book, I explained, my voice devoid of emotion. Your world cannot intrude upon mine. I then showed it the difference between us. But my world is different. My own mindscape began to bleed into its reality, a darkness that consumed the red. The pathetic crimson sea was swallowed whole by my abyss. My world devoured its world, a predator consuming its prey. The creature was aghast. My world should be like the thoughts of a heinous war criminal who committed forbidden mass destruction magic. A sixth circle high mage level world being pushed back this easily, it stammered. It finally understood its place, screaming in disbelief. How am I being devoured by the world of a mere child? The number your master killed doesn't even count compared to my past, I informed the fading echo. I can't even remember a single city. The reason was simple, because I killed far too many. Its shock was palpable as its form began to flicker. It screamed as my reality tore its existence apart. The avatar of slaughter was being unmade before my eyes. I moved in to end this farce. With a final desperate roar, it shouted, "Do you think I'll be devoured so easily?" I simply watched its final pointless struggle. With a single effortless motion, I severed its connection to the grimoire. Its form shattered into a dozen pieces. It reached out with a disintegrating hand, a final act of futility. This can't be. Its body crumbled into nothing. I stood impassively as its last remnants dissolved into the abyss. The fragments of its being were erased completely. The mindscape shattered like a broken mirror. I found myself back in the library, the grimoire now silent. A soft voice spoke beside me. Did I come back, big brother? I turned to see a girl with goat-like horns, the true avatar of the grimoire I'd sought. I assessed her silently. She smiled, seemingly pleased. You called for me, big brother. Nice to meet you. I was so lonely all this time. Her grin was unsettling, a mask of childish innocence over something ancient and dark. I remained still, letting her reveal her nature. She tilted her head. You'll play with me, right? It was so cold and lonely here, she whispered, her smile widening. I gave no reply, my mind already working through the implications. This was the consciousness of the Book of the Black Goat. It was said to be a grimoire written by an immortal duke who sacrificed his daughter to peer beyond the veil of death. That ritual is what gave the grimoire the avatar of a young girl, a convenient lie. But that girl is never truly the immortal duke's real daughter, I thought, knowing the truth of its origin. She made her offer, make a contract with me, daughter of the Black Goat. We stood facing each other, two predators sizing one another up. She issued a challenge of her own. Alright, then show me your world, big brother. Okay, I agreed without hesitation. In an instant, the dusty library was replaced by an endless, frozen wasteland under a perpetually gray sky. She looked around, genuinely impressed. Wow, so this is your world? How beautiful. I really like you, big brother, she said, a hint of real admiration in her voice. She floated gracefully in the cold air. Then her attention shifted. But you know, she noticed the unwelcome guests who had just appeared in my domain. What are those? She asked, pointing towards them. Cardinal Nikolai, the rat I'd made a deal with, was stammering in fear. The girl's eyes narrowed slightly. Young Master Dale. I stood calmly, waiting for the fools to make their move. The cardinal was babbling about how I couldn't have possibly obtained the book, so I cut him off. "Your Eminence Cardinal Nikolai, what brings you all the way here?" He and his armored paladins approached, their unease practically a stench in the air. He started spouting some nonsense about our contract being invalid. His face was slick with nervous sweat. "You must have been uneasy," I stated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. A cruel smile played on my lips as I laid his pathetic scheme bare. "It seems the Geas oath alone wasn't enough to put you at ease," I said. "You came here to eliminate me, but this is a world of darkness." I spread my arms, the chilling wind of my world swirling around me. His men looked around, their bravado failing them. "You chose the wrong place for a mage of light to stand." He forced a laugh. "A mistake. I was only worried about you, that's all." The girl beside me had grown bored. "Hey, big brother," she chirped. Her eyes gleamed with hunger. "Can I eat those?" "I won't take responsibility if you get a stomachache," I replied, giving my consent. She clapped her hands in delight. Okay, it's been so long since a feast, I'm so excited." Panic finally shattered the cardinal's composure. As he gripped his holy symbol, he began desperately chanting a prayer. "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit." His hands shook as he invoked his deity. A pillar of light descended from the gray sky. "Have mercy on us." He and his men were bathed in its holy glow. "Grant us mercy," he pleaded. "God wills it," he declared, the light flaring brighter. His paladins began to transform, sprouting wings of light. "May the sister goddess's mercy and compassion be with us. The Lord's light has covered you, praise him," they cried in unison. They ascended, now looking like cheap imitations of angels. The cardinal, filled with a pathetic, borrowed courage, pointed at me. "Destroy that servant of Satan." I couldn't help but grin. This was becoming entertaining. As expected, it won't be easy, I thought, though the outcome was already certain. The angels dove at me, their swords glowing with holy light. They were fast, but utterly predictable. I moved between their clumsy strikes with ease. Their attacks were flashy but lacked any real substance. It was a pathetic excuse for a battle. I raised my hand, gathering shadows around my fingertips. "Shadow bullet," I incanted, firing a lance of pure darkness. It narrowly missed one of them as he twisted in the air. "Teach, damn it. You dodge well," I muttered, mildly annoyed. I landed softly as they surrounded me, their expressions grim. The cardinal gloated from a safe distance. "As expected of my angels. Genius you are, you're still only third circle," he sneered, dangling his cross. "Even the Book of the Black Goat cannot show its full power in your hands," he declared foolishly. Their holy hymns filled the air, a grating sound that pulsed with their power. They believed their numbers, and their faith gave them the advantage. The holy chanting was clearly irritating the girl beside me. She let out a pained grunt, the divine energy assaulting her demonic nature. She clutched her head, her patience finally snapping. "Shut up, shut up, shut up," she screamed, her voice distorting into a demonic roar. Shadowy tentacles erupted from her back, lashing out at the angels. They swiftly cut them down with their holy blades. The darkness reformed as quickly as it was severed. The paladins fought back, managing to slice away her shadowy limbs. "Good, the tentacles are cut off," one of them yelled in triumph. He raised his sword for a final blow. "Now receive judgment. Fallen one." But when he looked down, her face had become a blank, smiling mask, devoid of all emotion. He froze, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. A tendril of shadow shot up from the ground, grabbing him by the throat. He let out a choked scream as the darkness began to corrupt his very being. Her shadows swarmed the others, their holy lights sputtering and dying. She stood among them, a queen in her court of despair. "Are you all right?" the cardinal screamed in horror from the sidelines. His corrupted paladin could only groan, his mind breaking. "Ugh. Praise him." The cardinal's eyes widened in disbelief. One by one his holy warriors began to chant, their voices warped and twisted. "Praise him, praise him." Dark veins spread across their skin as my world's influence overwrote their blessing. The cardinal stared at his fallen angels, now puppets of the very darkness they fought. He clutched his cross, his last bastion of faith, as he stammered in absolute terror. The cardinal's holy knights writhed on the floor, their bodies spasming as they babbled nonsense about praise and glory. Dark corruption spread across their skin, a testament to the power I had just unleashed. From the swirling vortex of darkness, she emerged, her tentacles wrapping around the throat of the so-called archangel he'd summoned. The celestial fool choked out a few last words, recognizing the scent of a true predator. My little pet just smiled, a beautiful, terrifying grin that promised a slow, agonizing end for the angel. A sickening squelch and a spray of golden blood was all it took to end the divine puppet's existence. The cardinal stared in abject horror, finally understanding what he'd provoked. I wasn't some ducal prodigy or a child genius to be manipulated for the church's gain. I was exactly what their scriptures warned them about, a true child of the devil they so feared. I walked toward the pathetic old man as he groveled in the snow, his precious cross lying forgotten beside him. "The contracting parties bear no responsibility for what happens here," I reminded him, throwing his own arrogant words back in his face. He babbled, pleading for his life, his dignity completely shattered. "Then what can you offer me in return?" I asked, savoring the moment. He immediately offered everything he had: treasure, his title, the church's armies, like a desperate merchant hawking his wares. A small cold smile crept across my face. "I like that," I said, watching the hope flicker in his eyes before he could process my meaning. I simply held out my hand, a gesture he could not possibly misunderstand. I want everything you have, I clarified, my voice leaving no room for negotiation. The blood drained from his face as he realized I wasn't talking about his material wealth. It was time to rewrite our contract with his soul as the ink. A binding oath of absolute obedience. He had no way out. My beautiful little god appeared behind me, her work done. Playing with you was really fun, she said, her voice a pleasant melody amidst the silence. She declared that she liked this world and would wait for me here. Her smile was a promise of future chaos, and I found it quite appealing. She leaned in, her horns almost brushing my cheek as she asked, "Aren't you afraid of me?" I looked her right in the eye without a trace of fear. Of course, I knew her existence was far too dangerous to be summoned carelessly. I still couldn't fully control her power, making her a weapon to be used only when all other options were exhausted. "We'll be able to play like this again, right?" she asked, a hint of childlike hope in her voice. I assured her she would, and her resulting smile was a satisfying reward. "I promise," I told her, sealing the deal. Standing alone in the library, I knew this was only the beginning, and so my little war in hell came to a tidy end. The church, now under my thumb, held a grand absolution ceremony for me, all orchestrated by my new puppet, Cardinal Nikolai. He put on a magnificent show, pretending this was a gesture of friendship between the Jackson family and the church. With the church's blessing, no one dared question my actions or stand in my way ever again. A few months later, I observed the training grounds. My father's knight captain gave the order to begin, and the girl Charlotte answered with a firm yes. She ignited her aura, a dark, violent energy that was a perfect match for the Jackson family's techniques. The sheer power she emanated was impressive, even to me. She swung the massive greatsword as if it were a feather. The captain called a halt to the spar, the other knights staring in awe. He praised her, remarking that achieving a complete aura blade at her age was astounding. I stepped forward, cutting through the chatter. "Charlotte of Orhart." I addressed her directly. "Dale of Jackson asks you, for your lord's honor, your family's honor, and everything you must protect, will you swear as a knight?" Without hesitation, she drove her sword into the ground and knelt. She was ready to offer her loyalty. I administered the oath. "Do you swear to not be swayed by personal desire, to protect the weak and to punish evil?" "I swear," she replied, her voice unwavering. "Then in the name of Jackson, I hereby appoint Sir Charlotte as my knight," I declared, and a look of fierce pride lit up her face. Later, she asked if I was truly okay with her choice of weapon. "Yes," I said simply. "I like the sword of the Jackson family, because that sword made you who you are now." She chose our family's brutal greatsword over the elegant rapier of her own house, a decision that proved her worth. Perhaps I thought I had been underestimating her potential all along. "Charlotte," I began, getting straight to business. "We've received intel that a massive orc warband is gathering beyond the Demon King's territory." I informed her that an orc warlord was leading the army, and that my father would personally lead the northern forces into battle. "In that battle," I stated, locking my eyes with hers, "I want you to stay by my side." She understood immediately. With a determined fire in her eyes, she placed a hand over her heart and vowed, "I will become the sword that protects my lord. My sword will be swung only for you." Perfect. Another loyal piece on the board. In the main hall, my father listened to the reports of the orc warband's large-scale movement. One of the vassals nervously wondered if the great demon migration was starting again. Another lord confirmed it was likely. They spoke of the old legends, when the hero defeated the Demon King, only for lesser demons to invade southward in a desperate bid for survival. Father wasted no time, issuing orders to summon all northern lords and knight orders for war. "It'll be a battlefield on a scale never seen before," he said, his expression grim. Then his gaze fell upon me. "Dale, it's time to teach you how to use necromancy on the battlefield." Deep in the Duke's underground workshop, my real education was about to begin. He started with a simple question, a test of my basic knowledge. "Dale, what do you think is the difference between a death knight and an undead soldier?" he asked, his voice echoing in the stone chamber. I gave him the textbook answer, the one any fool would offer. "Isn't it the difference between a knight and a common soldier?" I replied, feigning youthful simplicity. His expression remained impassive, unimpressed by my surface-level thinking. He pressed further, "Then where does the difference between a knight and a soldier come from?" I put on a show of deep thought, stroking my chin like a pondering scholar. "I think it comes from a difference in combat power," I ventured, feeding him the next logical, yet incomplete conclusion. "Half right and half wrong," he conceded, his arms crossed as if lecturing a particularly dull student. He elaborated on his little riddle, stating that having great strength does not make everyone a knight. "Then, is it the presence of an aura blade?" I asked, playing my part perfectly, arriving at the answer he wanted me to find. "That's right," he confirmed, his gaze drifting downwards. On the cold stone floor lay a corpse, dressed in the armor of a soldier. "This one is," I began, letting my voice trail off in feigned surprise. "Yes, a knight who died in the recent black and white war," he confirmed, his tone grim. He continued, explaining the man's history, as if it were a badge of honor. "This aura knight, when he was knighted, swore to offer his body to the Jackson family even in death. The Duke raised his hand and the familiar corrupting energy of necromancy began to coalesce around his fingers. Dark purple tendrils snaked from his hand and sank into the corpse, which began to twitch violently. The higher his level as an Aura Knight was in life, he began to explain as the dead man was forced to his knees. The stronger the Death Knight that can be raised, he finished as the reanimated soldier stood, its eyes glowing with malevolent power. This pathetic creature was now a puppet, a tool defined solely by its past strength. I looked up at the towering undead figure, a perfect tool for my future plans. Whether alive or dead, I said with a smile that didn't reach my eyes, remember that they are knights who possess pride. Satisfied with my supposed understanding, he turned to leave. Follow me, he commanded, leading me deeper into the darkness. A faint, knowing smirk played on his lips as he walked ahead of me. There is something I want to show you, he said, his voice hinting at the grand secrets of our family. The sound of our footsteps echoed as we descended further into the earth. He led me down a long winding staircase, the air growing colder with every step. The path seemed endless, a descent into the very heart of our family's depravity. I feigned childish curiosity, asking, how far are we going? He stopped and turned to me, his expression serious. Dale, do you know about Frederick, the immortal Duke, the founder of the Jackson family? Of course I knew. The name echoed in my mind, not from storybooks, but from the ancient grimoire that was now fused with my very soul. The immortal Duke Frederick, the source of my power, and the architect of this family's curse. I only know what I read in books and what father told me. I lied smoothly. He was a monster of truth, the Duke said, his voice low and heavy with a strange reverence. His next words were meant to shock me, to test my resolve. He did not hesitate to sacrifice even his own daughter. We finally reached our destination, a massive, sealed gate pulsing with dark energy. And what I am about to show you is what he once pursued, and what the Jackson family still owes to this day. He grandly announced the name of this place as the darkness of the old age. As we approached, the gate reacted to our bloodline, the purple seal cracking apart to grant us passage. The gate only opens for those of the true Jackson bloodline, a convenient lock to keep our skeletons hidden. I widened my eyes, putting on the perfect performance of a shocked and overwhelmed child. Before us stood an army, silent and still, rank upon rank of knights in black armor, stretching into the gloom. They were all dead, an entire legion of death knights waiting for a command. What is this? I whispered, my voice laced with false awe. A method to operate the dead without a continuous mana supply, he answered, revealing the secret. This was the so-called Great Leap that our monstrous ancestor had discovered so long ago. The heads of the Jackson family, generation after generation, he began, his voice sweeping across the silent legion, began to cultivate an army of death called the Death Order. He stood proudly amidst his collection of corpses, declaring, I too am continuing the will of the immortal Duke. My expression twisted into one of dawning horror, the perfect mask for the cold fury I truly felt. It all made sense now. The Duke seemed pleased with my reaction. The way you showed your will through your actions was quite impressive. He placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture that was meant to be paternal. Do not lose that, Dale. The family's complete isolation from the world, and the Black Duke's obsessive emphasis on morality, while wielding such dark power. It was all just a cage, a pathetic attempt to keep this army of death safely under control. The first thought that came to my mind when I realized the full scope of their plan was simple. It was a hypocrisy so filthy it made me want to vomit. This is our darkness, he proclaimed, gesturing to the undead soldiers as if they were a crown. And this darkness is also the shield that protects us. I clenched my jaw, my knuckles turning white as I feigned a great internal struggle. My hand trembled as I channeled my mana, letting the dark energy surge through me. I squeezed the jewel on my uniform, focusing my resolve. I was prepared from the beginning, I declared, my voice cold and steady. I met his gaze without flinching. Dale of Jackson will accept it willingly. Power is power, and I will seize it, no matter how impure and evil that power may be. He grunted in approval, a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. He gestured towards the first Death Knight he'd raised, giving me silent permission to take control. I extended my hand, and the dark energy flowed from me, not with the struggle of a novice, but with the authority of a master. The Death Knight immediately knelt, then rose, its loyalty transferred to me. Its blade became an extension of my will, imbued with my own knowledge of the sword. It moved with a grace and deadliness that its living form could have only dreamed of. The air crackled with its movements, each swing of its sword a masterclass in refined mana control. My technique, my experience, flowing through this new tireless body. Such an unbelievable concentration of refined mana, the Duke muttered, unable to hide his shock. I simply smiled and fed his ego. Because I am learning from the best teacher, I added a touch of humility. But I still can't control Death Knights without a mana supply like the Death Order Knights. The knight I controlled knelt before me, a perfect servant. It is still too early for you to learn that, he said, easily accepting my lie. What I will teach you is how to use necromancy on the battlefield. His gaze hardened. You must focus on training for the coming battle. He moved his hand, his expression serious as he prepared another demonstration. With a flick of his wrist, he began pulling souls from the ether, Two pathetic goblin corpses lying nearby were animated by his dark magic. They were crude puppets, nothing more than disposable pawns. A goblin shambled forward, its eyes glowing with a dull red light. It lunged, a worthless creature, driven by residual instinct. My Death Knight stood impassively, waiting for the creature to close the distance. Another goblin joined the pathetic attack. With a single fluid motion, my knight cleaved through both of them, their bodies disintegrating before they could even land a blow. The display of overwhelming power was absolute. My puppet then fell to one knee, its head bowed, awaiting my next command. The remnants of the goblins dissolved into dust at my feet. The Duke stared, a look of utter disbelief on his face. Amazing, he understood that not all Death Knights were created equal. He reasoned that controlling corpses is usually for necromancers who never held a sword in life, but the swordsmanship I had just displayed through my puppet was on a level that surpassed even living Raven Knights. He couldn't comprehend it, wondering what kind of monstrous talent I possessed. Elsewhere, my other teacher, the elf Lilith, was beginning to notice the chill I carried, a strange, unsettling feeling that clung to me like a shroud. She remembered a time when I had used my magic to create a spectacle for her in the snow. She couldn't quite place the feeling I gave her, a confusing mix of emotions. It started the day I looked at her with my innocent child's face and said, "I like you, teacher." Even then, as I played the part of a boy who knew nothing, she felt the cold darkness and an insatiable desire lurking beneath the surface. She mistook my ambition for a simple desire for affection, a critical misjudgment on her part. Now back in the present, we stood in the snow as I practiced my elemental control. "Your water element control has improved a lot," she complimented, ever the doting instructor. "Yes, I promised father he can be proud of a son," I replied, weaving the perfect, dutiful lie. I let my smile fade, adopting a somber expression as I stared into the distance. "But you look worried," she observed, her voice soft with concern. "What is the matter?" I turned to her, my expression carefully crafted to convey vulnerability. "Teacher, even if you see my ugly side, will you still like me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Her eyes widened, completely caught off guard by this sudden heavy question. I pressed on, "If one day I accept the dark side of the family, I'm afraid you might be disappointed in me." Before I could continue my manipulative performance, her hand shot out, covering my mouth. She gently took my face in her hands, her expression unreadable. "Teacher," I feigned confusion. Her eyes softened with a deep, misplaced pity, a look that told me she had fallen completely into my trap. My teacher's hands were cold against my cheeks, but her eyes held a warmth that belied the snowy landscape around us. Her expression was a mixture of concern and something deeper, something I was only beginning to understand. "An elf's life is long," she said, her voice soft but firm, a stark contrast to the battlefield cries I was growing accustomed to. "Even when you become a proper man someday, I will still be here." She couldn't understand her own attachment, this strange affection for a child destined for such a dark path. While the fools in the capital were singing my praises, she was walking through the streets hearing the whispers that truly defined me. They spoke of the Black Prince and his great victory, but she couldn't find any joy in it. They called me the God of Massacre, a title I had earned with an ocean of blood, and she knew I had the talent to move the wheel of history, but feared the path of slaughter it required. It was then she made her vow, looking at me not as a student, but as something more. "I will stay by your side," she promised, her grip on my face tightening with resolve. But as one woman, her words were a shock, a sudden crack in the icy fortress I had built around my heart. She was telling me I wasn't alone, a sentiment I had long since discarded as a useless liability. She tried to deflect, to return to the simple roles of teacher and student, her smile a fragile mask, but I couldn't let it go. I pulled her into an embrace, the first genuine warmth I had felt in years. "Thank you," I said, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. I looked her in the eyes, making my own promise. I really like you, Sepia Nim." I told her to wait for me, a command disguised as a request. She simply agreed, and in that moment the cold and loneliness that clung to me, like a shroud, finally receded. Some time later that warmth felt like a distant memory, replaced by the cold reality of my station. The northern lords gathered in the duchy, a flock of vultures assembling before a feast of demon flesh. It's one of them, Wilhelm of Gioll, puffed out his chest and announced his pathetic contribution of men before my father. They all knelt, presenting themselves before the Duke of Jackson, their fealty as hollow as their skulls. I sat beside my father, watching the parade of fools. They were all ambitious, eager to catch the Duke's eye, practically offering up their children as sacrificial lambs for a sliver of favor. They would grovel and say, "Please look after my son," a pathetic plea for relevance. This disgusting ritual of socializing was just as much a part of war as the bloodshed. For a great lord, gathering followers was a display of power, and these nobles and their spawn knew exactly who held the real authority here. They all swarmed towards me, the so-called Black Prince. The first to approach was Bess, the eldest son of that peacock from Gioll, his eyes burning with a pathetic desire for glory by association. I offered a meaningless platitude, calling him reliable, and he practically preened. Then came the noble ladies, their compliments as cheap and cloying as their perfume. Politics. As I endured their fawning, another challenger emerged from the crowd. A knight in black armor, his eyes fixed on me, spoke of the rumors of my power and declared he wanted to see my martial skill with his own eyes. One of my retainers immediately moved to discipline the fool for his insolence. I held up a hand, stopping him mid-stride. "You are Sir Yonez, the second son of the Kennet barony, correct?" I asked, my voice cutting through the murmurs of the room. He confirmed it, and I laid his intentions bare. You wish to see my martial skill for yourself. Does that mean you intend to test my strength? He faltered for a moment, surprised by my directness. He then launched into a prepared speech, praising the Empire's greatest genius and my past victories, trying to frame his challenge as a humble request. He claimed he simply wished to receive a few lessons with my sword. Oh, I said, a smirk playing on my lips as his father began to panic. I knew his story. I hear you lead a mercenary band of 100, a company he built himself, a wandering knight with nothing to his name. As a second son with no inheritance, he was making a desperate gamble to prove himself. How interesting. A man with nothing to lose could be a very useful tool. Very well, I announced, my voice ringing with authority. I will accept your challenge to a duel. My father watched from his throne, a silent approval in his eyes. This was a perfect opportunity to establish hierarchy before the war. Jonas stood there, a mix of shock and grim determination on his face. I let my shadow sword materialize in my hand, its dark energy chilling the air. Yes, I have heard of your shadow sword, he said, his voice tight. He stared at me, stunned that I would allow him to use his full power. Fight with your full strength, I commanded, my smile widening. This is an order. He had no choice but to obey, his own aura flaring to life as he grit his teeth and said, understood. He charged, his aura swirling around him as he closed the distance in an instant. His control was decent, I noted with detached interest, but he was nowhere near the level required to form a true aura blade. Then, I murmured, deciding to give him a taste of real power. A torrent of black energy erupted from me, coalescing into a sword of pure shadow. The onlookers gasped. That was the Black Prince's sword. Come at me any time, I said, utterly bored. He took the bait. He lunged, bringing his sword down with all his might, a predictable overhead strike. With a lazy flick of 2 fingers, I intercepted his blade, stopping his momentum completely. The shock on his face was exquisite. We clashed, his blade scraping uselessly against mine. He started shouting some nonsense about how I was born with everything. He vowed he would prove that someone with nothing could defeat someone with everything. It was the most common, most tedious speech in the world. He pushed forward, desperately searching for a weakness that didn't exist. My deliberate slow retreat gave him a false sense of hope. An opening, he cried, seeing the gap I had intentionally created for him. Take this. He roared, lunging forward to claim his imaginary victory. He lunged, a flash of clumsy purple aura, announcing his every move. I sidestepped with contemptuous ease, the floor barely registering my presence. His eyes widened in shock, unable to track my speed. It was pathetic, like watching a child chase a shadow. I appeared above him, my own dark power manifesting into a blade meant to crush his confidence. He barely managed to raise his sword, the impact jarring his entire body. I landed softly, my aura coiling around me like a patient predator. From the very ground he stood on, I commanded shadows to rise as swords. The sudden eruption of force sent him stumbling backward across the polished floor. He scrambled for balance, his form utterly broken. More blades materialized from the darkness, hovering silently at my side. I watched his growing panic with a cold, detached interest. With a simple flick of my wrist, I sent the phantom arsenal flying toward him. Each projectile moved with lethal precision, forcing him into a desperate dance of survival. He flailed, parrying wildly as the barrage of shadow overwhelmed him. Finally, I let the assault cease, allowing the fool a moment to breathe. Your movement is good, I said, my voice echoing in the silent hall. Your martial skill is worthy of a mercenary captain. At this level, I continued, condensing a sphere of pure darkness in my palm. You're a sufficient opponent to prove my name. I dismissed the orb and stood casually, my sword pointed at the floor. Come at me. I will not move from this spot. His face contorted with rage, the insult striking deeper than any blade. You'll regret looking down on me, he roared, his pride wounded. He threw himself forward, pouring all his remaining strength into a single, telegraphed overhead swing. I remained perfectly still, waiting for the inevitable. The clash of steel was disappointingly quiet as my shadow-infused blade met his. The shockwave of my aura sent him staggering back, his attack utterly nullified. I could see it in his eyes the moment his will shattered. He understood then that any further struggle was meaningless. His knees buckled under the weight of his own failure. His sword slipped from his grasp, clattering loudly on the marble floor. I don't know any way to surpass him anymore, his expression screamed. Damn it, he whispered, a curse directed at his own weakness. He lowered his head, finally admitting the truth. This is my defeat. His surrender was absolute. From the corner of my eye, I saw the Northern Lords murmuring amongst themselves, wondering if this power came from the forbidden book of the Black Goat. They had no idea that throughout the fight it felt as if the entire world had slowed down just for me. This mercenary captain, Jonas, realized he was merely a pawn in a larger demonstration. He knew my true target wasn't him, but the Northern Lords and their children watching this duel, but his foolish pride wouldn't let him accept it. I can't let myself be toyed with like this. He ignited his aura one last time, a final desperate burst of energy. He lunged again, a predictable and futile charge. I moved like smoke, his blade cutting through nothing but air. But Jonas did not want to accept reality. His mind flashed back to all his solitary training, honing his skills against rocks and trees. He was confronting the Empire's greatest talent, a fact he now understood as the unfairness of the world itself, and he realized again that any further struggle was meaningless. The truth broke him for a second time as he collapsed to his knees. His sword once again fell from his trembling hands. His spirit was crushed, his eyes empty. I don't know any way to surpass him anymore. Damn it, he choked out the words devoid of any fire. He bowed his head fully to the ground. This is my defeat. A wave of humiliation washed over him. The whispers started again, theorizing about the source of my power, but I was focused on the new sensations coursing through me. Throughout the fight, it felt as if the world had slowed down. To think I'd achieved such an overwhelming victory over someone fighting at full strength with aura was... The Shadow Cloak sword now feels as if it has become part of my body. It's as if I were controlling shadow blades with unseen tentacles. Thanks to my fight with Sir Jonas, I could feel the change, but I still had to set an example. Shadow bullet, I incanted, the words leaving my lips like ice. I pointed a single finger towards the kneeling man. 2 daggers of pure darkness shot forward and pierced his hands. He looked up, his face a mask of shock and agony. "Guk!" he cried out as the blades pinned him to the floor. His pathetic whimper was the only sound in the hall. I looked down at him, my expression unreadable. Then I raised my voice to address the silent onlookers. "Is there anyone who wishes to challenge me again?" My gaze swept across the room, lingering on the pale faces of the other knights. Anyone who doubts my name and seeks to prove themselves. I let the question hang in the air. Is there still anyone with that kind of courage left? The silence was my answer. Utter, complete submission. One by one, the knights stepped forward, not to fight, but to kneel. They laid their swords before them in a gesture of fealty. "We swear our loyalty to you, young master," they declared in unison. A cold smile touched my lips. I absent-mindedly recalled a phrase my father often said. He always believed in one simple truth: fear guarantees loyalty. Looking at the sea of bowed heads before me, I had to admit it was truly exactly as he said. Later that evening, the nobles feigned celebration, their laughter hollow. I watched from a balcony as Jonas and his mercenaries departed the estate. One of his subordinates approached him. "Captain, you don't look well." Jans took a long swig from a bottle. "This damn world. No matter how much I swing my sword, I can't even reach his toes," he slurred. "So how could I possibly look fine?" His men fell silent, offering no comfort. He began to rant. "Is a person's worth decided at birth?" He gripped the bottle, his knuckles white. "Or can it change depending on effort? Who would dare spout such nonsense?" I thought, amused by his pathetic monologue. For him, facing me was like standing before an insurmountable wall. Damn it, thinking about it again just pisses me off. His men tried to placate him. "Let's just drink." They settled around a fire in the winter cold, their moods grim. A quiet camp in a vast, snowy wilderness. Jonas continued his bitter complaints. "You should have seen the noble women clinging to that 11-year-old brat." "What were they like?" one asked, trying to humor him. "Noble ladies fawning that hard just to catch a brat's eye. It was disgusting to watch," he sneered. His men chuckled darkly. "Haha, nobles really have no shame at all. Take off the noble title and they're all the same," Jonas declared with a bitter laugh. "That's right, on the battlefield they're nothing special. Haha." Jonas's eyes glazed over. "Come to think of it, does that brat even know how to deal with women?" "Of course, Captain. He's still a man in the end." "Oh really?" A new voice cut through the night. Jonas choked on his drink, his eyes wide with terror. "What? When did you get here?" he stammered, scrambling to his feet. His men were frozen, paralyzed by my sudden appearance. I was already sitting beside him, a calm smile on my face that offered no warmth. I took the mug from his hand. "What are you doing? You should take the drink." I offered him a full bottle of wine instead. "Ah yes," he stuttered, accepting it. "The world feels cursed, doesn't it?" I asked, my voice soft. "That's not true," he stammered, but I cut him off. "That's just how the world is." As he poured his drink, I elaborated. "Unfair and absurd, with nothing people can truly decide for themselves. Natural talent from birth, the environment around you. Among all these fates, is there even one we can choose by our own will?" He shook his head, defeated. "None, there isn't." I patted his shoulder condescendingly. He flinched at my touch. "So don't blame yourself too much," I said, my voice a soothing poison. He looked at me, utterly broken. "Fates in this world we can change with our own hands. Don't exist anywhere." The last of his hope died, and he covered his face with his hand. "Yes, I think what you said is right, young master." Lake finally accepted the truth I presented him. No matter how hard I struggled, I never had a chance anyway. "Sir Jonas, second son of the Kinnet Baron family. You and your mercenary band both." I gave him a sharp, predatory smile. "Would you consider swinging your sword for the Jackson family under my command?" His head snapped up, his eyes filled with disbelief. He stared at me, speechless, able to form only a single, choked sound. "What?" I sat by the fire, letting him stew in his own inadequacy before laying out my terms. "Yes. Before the coming battle, my knights will teach you and your men." I saw the flicker of hope ignite in his eyes as I detailed the training, from the absolute basics to the aura techniques that were the exclusive domain of elites. His shock was palpable. He couldn't believe an opportunity like this would fall into his lap. He finally understood that the very world that had beaten him down was now, through me, offering him a lifeline. I watched him, my expression unreadable, as I held all the power in this exchange. He finally managed to stammer out the question burning in his mind. "Double I, why are you doing this much for me?" His desperation was a tool, and I was about to sharpen it. My answer was simple, cold, and stripped of all sentiment. "I happened to need someone and you were there." He stared at me, the harsh reality of my words sinking in. This wasn't charity, it was a transaction. The world is, after all, a cruel and unfair place. But in that moment, he saw me as something different, a force that could bend that unfairness to my will. Some time later, I was back in Jackson Castle, the petty concerns of mercenaries forgotten. In the meeting room, my father demanded a report on the war front. The situation was as I expected. A massive mountain range served as a natural barrier, with our fortresses holding the passes against the demon hordes. Our knights were putting on a good show, fighting fiercely to sell the illusion of a desperate defense. The report stated that our forward units, the Winter Watch, had finally begun their strategic retreat. They were falling back from the 9th fortress, pulling the northern lords with them, and scorching the earth as they went. My father's face was a grim mask, but I knew he was satisfied. They had burned all the supplies they couldn't carry. Good, he said, his voice low and steady. Everything is going according to plan. We will fall back in stages. The orcs, arrogant and stupid, would continue their advance, stretching their supply lines thin. We would let them exhaust themselves chasing our ghosts, luring them all the way to the upper reaches of the Jackson River. Once they were bogged down and weakened, we would strike from our prepared positions and annihilate their main force. With the trap set, it was time to deploy our field army, and my father gave the order. Then his eyes found mine across the table. Dale. He was giving me the most critical piece of the operation, command of the mobile strike force, composed of the elite Night Raven Knights. My task was to lead the vanguard and shatter their formation once the real battle began. I accepted the command without a word, my mind already calculating the variables. In addition, he added, Lady Sepia will assist you at your side. Now that was a surprise. Father preempted my question, explaining that while the Blue Tower feigned neutrality in mortal wars, Sepia was already officially our family's chief advisor, a clever political maneuver to secure her power. He finished with a dismissive wave. Besides, fighting demons can hardly be called a mere worldly conflict. I couldn't help but wonder if this was truly her own decision. Yes, my father confirmed, as if reading my thoughts. He placed his faith in me, reminding me of my recent victory that secured my position. I felt the weight of his expectations settle on my shoulders, a familiar burden. Understood, father, I replied, but I wasn't finished. There is one more thing I would like to ask. His sharp gaze met mine. Speak. Please assign the young divine sword to my unit, Charlotte, a valuable piece and one I intended to keep close. Later, I watched as she donned her full plate armor, piece by piece. Standing there, encased in black steel, she was indeed reliable. She was my escort knight, a living weapon sworn to protect the infamous Black Prince. A small, satisfied laugh escaped me. She truly looked the part now, a proper knight, the girl within hidden beneath layers of duty and steel. Before we departed, I pulled her aside. The ghosts of my past life reminded me how easily such loyalty can be squandered. I would not make the same mistakes again. Let's make one promise, I told her, my voice low. My command was simple, an order that seemed to contradict her entire purpose. Don't die. She recited the dogma she'd been taught, that a knight's duty was to risk her life for her lord. She waited, expecting me to agree with her naive sense of honor. Want me to tell you what a knight's real duty is? I asked, cutting through her delusion. It is to never betray your lord's trust, and I don't want you to die. For the first time, I let her see something other than the cold strategist. The words hit her harder than any physical blow, and she vowed to engrave my command into her very soul. Good, my assets must be preserved. Soon after, our forces marched out, a river of steel under the northern sky. My father led the main army south, a grand display to draw the enemy's attention. Meanwhile, my strike force, Vale, Charlotte, Sepia, and the Night Ravens, rode hard toward the true battlefield at the Jackson River. In this war, Sepia was no longer my teacher, she was a weapon, and my advisor. That night we made camp under a full moon, the air thick with anticipation. Our mobile strike force was a collection of silent tents near the rushing water. I found Sepia standing alone, gazing at the stars as if searching for an answer. I approached her quietly, my armored boots making little sound on the damp earth. Lady Sepia, I said, breaking the silence. She turned to face me. Dale, you're still awake this late? I had no time for pleasantries. Why did you accept my father's proposal? A cryptic smile played on her lips, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark. I am merely fulfilling my duty, she answered, her voice a soft whisper. She then reminded me of her promise to always remain by my side, a vow I hadn't forgotten. I felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through my chest and allowed a small smile. Thank you, I said, just as a flash of red light cut through the night sky. An enemy signal. Instantly, I was in command. All members of the strike force, prepare for battle, move immediately to the crossing point. My eyes scanned the darkness, and I saw them hulking silhouettes moving along the opposite cliff. The bastards were making their move before we were ready. They were trying to seize the initiative. Vale was at my side in an instant, his face grim. Young Master Dale, his hand was on his sword, his eyes fixed on me, waiting for the order. I took a breath, my mind racing faster than a striking viper, while he urged me to give the order. Thousands of them, attempting a forced crossing, their desperation told me everything I needed to know. Surveil, I commanded, my voice cutting through the rising chaos. Take 4 cavalry battalions and charge the front. Annihilate the orc vanguard before they can establish a bridgehead. I will take the other 2 battalions and strike their rear. I finished, laying out the pincer. He nodded sharply, his command received. The ground began to tremble as the orcs orcs charged into the river, and our archers knocked their arrows. The command rang out across our lines. Archers, aim. A volley of death rained down upon the charging horde. The first blood of the battle spilled under the pale moon. As the front line erupted into chaos, Vale's cavalry thundered forward to meet the tide. I watched them go, my hand gripping my reins. Hold on just a little longer, Vale. Then I spurred my own horse, leading my 2 battalions on a wide, looping path through the darkened woods. From a hidden ridge, I saw them, the enemy's exposed flank. A cold, predatory grin touched my lips. At my signal, he screams the command, and a volley of steel-tipped arrows darkens the sky. They rain down into the chasm, a pathetic attempt to slow the inevitable tide of filth charging towards us. The orcs and their mangy wolves barely flinch, their brutish charge only accelerating as they taste blood in the air. Their mounts splash through the shallow river, closing the distance with predictable, mindless aggression. One of the beasts leaps with its rider, soaring through the air like some grotesque parody of a noble knight. It lands amidst my vanguard, its jaws clamping down on a soldier's neck, silencing his scream with a wet crunch. My men cry out for mercy, their lines buckling under the sheer ferocity of the charge. The orcs have reached the bridge, and the desperate shouts of my soldiers confirm what I already know. The front line is about to break. They scramble to hold their ground, a chaotic dance of steel and death playing out below me. Meanwhile, my cavalry and I ride along the ridge, hidden from view, preparing for the true purpose of this battle. A forced march has left the enemy's main force exhausted, and their command structure stretched thin. They must be isolated from any potential reinforcements. While Vale's unit serves as the sacrificial bait, my elite force will strike from the rear, collapsing their formation from the inside out. Vale just needs to hold them a little longer, a task for which he is barely adequate. Predictably, he takes a heavy blow, stumbling back as one of his knights falls dead at his feet. The orc chieftain and its mount loom over them, a monument to savage stupidity. Just as the beast roars, my signal comes from the beleaguered front line. Now, charge the rear. A torrent of mana explodes behind the enemy, sending dirt and bodies flying. My men shout my name as my cavalry thunders into the fray, Vale staring in disbelief that my plan is actually working. He screams orders to push the front line, trying to take credit for a strategy far beyond his comprehension. The fool raises his banner, bellowing at his men to tighten the encirclement now that I've done all the work. My knights tear through the disorganized orcs, their lances finding purchase in green flesh. I remain calm amidst the chaos, my eyes fixed on the true targets. As I gather my mana, a whisper leaves my lips, a name for the coming darkness. Shadow bullet. A lance of pure shadow erupts from my sword, piercing through an orc rider as if its armor were paper. My soldiers gawk in amazement, their morale surging. The young master is leading the charge himself. I find myself face to face with one of the larger brutes. It looks more confused than angry. It can even raise its weapon. One of my loyal knights charges past me. His blade sinks deep into the creature's back. A swift and efficient execution. I offer him a slight nod. Don't worry, leave the rest to me. Just then, my teacher speaks, her voice cutting through the din of battle. Dale, if we delay any longer, the orcs will shift their formation. She is right, the window of opportunity is closing. We'll withdraw before they begin their encirclement. On the front line, Vale continues his desperate struggle, buying us the time we need. One of my scouts shouts a warning from the ridge. Young master, the orc riders are turning around. Indeed, the main force has noticed our surgical strike and is now charging back to intercept us. Everything is proceeding exactly as I envisioned. Retreat, I command. We turn our mounts and ride, feigning a panicked withdrawal as the orcs give chase. Our objective was never to win this skirmish. Overwhelmingly, it was simply to cripple them. Now I will lure their most powerful units into a kill zone, far from help, and annihilate them completely. My teacher looks on approvingly. Good, this should be enough. Her eyes then widen in surprise. What is that? Hot on the heels of the orcs, a lone rider on a common horse appears, an unwelcome variable. My teacher squints, confused. A horse. The rider's hands begin to glow, coalescing a power that feels dangerously familiar. She gasps in horrified recognition. Dale, be careful, she cries out, her warning almost too late. Without hesitation, she summons her own magic, her hands glowing with frigid light. A massive wall of jagged ice erupts from the earth, shielding my retreating cavalry, but the masked rider merely scoffs, his own spell reaching its crescendo. He is wreathed in an inferno, a pyromancer of considerable power. With a flick of his wrist, he unleashes a massive fireball toward our position. It screams through the air, an orb of pure destruction aimed at my teacher's barrier. The impact is deafening, a cataclysm of steam and shattered ice. The orcs caught in the blast are instantly incinerated, their dying screams swallowed by the flames. One of my knights stares in horror at the aftermath. What is that flame? It burned even the bones to ash. I know that fire. I know that fanaticism. Those bastards. There's no time for doubt. Spread out immediately. I command my troops. The pyromancer announces his presence for all to hear. The Red Tower's purifier has appeared. He's not alone. So the Red Tower's hunting dogs have finally arrived. Purifier's combat mages bred for the sole purpose of burning anyone who opposes their twisted ideology. My teacher's expression hardens. A mage of the Red Tower. Yes, they're targeting me. Of course they are. I order my men to keep moving, to avoid clustering. A stationary target is a dead target. This complicates things immensely. This is the worst possible situation. My mind races, calculating the rapidly dwindling odds. A direct charge against mages, with this level of firepower, would be suicide. But if we scatter, the remaining orc riders will hunt us down one by one, a pincer from 2 different enemies. It seems I have no other choice. I will have to unleash that forbidden power. Suddenly my teacher's voice cuts through my thoughts, sharp and commanding. Get off the horse, Dale. I turn to face her, her expression grim but resolute. Let me fulfill my duty as your teacher, she says, leaving no room for argument. I understand. She intends to be the immovable object against their unstoppable force. Without a word, I swing my leg over my steed and dismount. My knights look on, utterly confused. Young master, I ignore their questions. The rest of the cavalry carry out my original orders. I look to Charlotte, my most loyal guard, inform my father of this situation. Immediately, she hesitates. I have a duty to protect you, Dale, she insists. I place a hand on her saddle, my voice leaving no room for negotiation. This is an order from your lord. Tears well in her eyes, but she is a soldier first. She gives a curt nod. Okay. I give her a faint, reassuring smile. It is more for her benefit than mine. She and the others wheel their horses around and gallop away, leaving me and my teacher behind. Now I can't run even if I wanted to. I mutter under my breath. My teacher stands beside me, a silent pillar of strength. She glances at me sideways. Were you thinking of running? A small smirk plays on my lips. No, how could I possibly leave you alone, teacher? As if on cue, the remaining orcs, drawn by the scent of isolated prey, charge toward us. Even Sepia, my elven second in command, lay groaning amongst the wreckage. Barely conscious, the 2 assassins responsible for this mess stood before me, their swords still dripping with the blood of my men. With a flicker of movement, I closed the distance, my blade sliding through one of the fool's ribs before he could even register my presence. His companion, however, merely smiled, his eyes glowing with a fanatic's light, as if this was all part of some grand idiotic plan. He detonated himself in a blast of fire in desperation, a final pathetic attempt to accomplish what his meager skills could not. Sepia could only watch from the ground, the shockwave washing over her as my shadow loomed over the explosion. She saw how the bodies of the knights she'd fought beside were incinerated in the inferno, a truly helpless end. The madman's laughter echoed as he turned to ash, screaming for his noble blood to burn brighter in this self-made hell. Another shadow lunged from my flank, thinking the explosion had left me vulnerable. But I was already waiting, my body dissolving into pure darkness as my race transformation activated. Seeing their last resort fail, the remaining fanatics charged, screaming to overwhelm me all at once with more suicide attacks. Their leader watched, his confident smirk finally replaced with a flicker of disbelief. I moved between their clumsy attacks, a phantom they couldn't possibly hope to touch. My dark sword met their steel, the impact sending ripples of shadow across the burning earth. One of them hurled a sphere of fire, a desperate spell from a desperate man. I gritted my teeth, not from strain, but from the sheer contempt I felt for their wasted effort. The pain they had inflicted upon my soldiers exploded from me, transforming into a storm of vengeful blades. The last of them gathered their remaining life force, preparing a final glorious explosion to martyr themselves. Their combined power erupted in a massive conflagration that scoured the battlefield clean. Their leader watched with a triumphant grin, certain that nothing could have survived such a blast. But I am not nothing. I am the very embodiment of vengeance, and I walked from his flames untouched. I stood before them on the scorched ground and delivered their final judgment. Your mission has failed. The 3 survivors stared, their minds unable to process my survival. Their leader forced a pathetic chuckle, trying to salvage some shred of dignity. He gestured to the corpses of my knights, asking if I could truly call this a victory. He preached that his Black Tower agents do not fear something as trivial as death, that they are always prepared to die. With a flourish, he declared they were ready to burn their bodies willingly for their cause. You say you are prepared for death? I asked, my voice dripping with cold curiosity. They screamed their loyalty to the Empire as their bodies ignited once more. But as the explosion began, it was instantly snuffed out, revealing the purifier Dale, standing where the blast should have been. What? The fanatics reappeared, their bodies restored, but their minds shattered with confusion. Then a figure on horseback emerged from the shadows, my father, the Black Duke. The traitors stared up at him, finally recognizing the architect of their failure, as he called them the Black Duke. My father's voice cut through the silence, cold and absolute. Do you have the resolve not to die? The lead traitor could only scoff, his arrogance still intact. He called it nonsense, and charged forward, his body once again erupting in flames. He screamed for me to die as he attempted to self-destruct for the 3rd time. Huh? Again. My father looked down upon him, his expression unreadable. Still haven't realized it. I have not permitted your deaths. With a gesture he unleashed his power, a curse he called abominable fusion. The fanatics began to scream as dark tendrils erupted from the ground, enveloping them completely. My father simply watched, the calm center of the storm of his own making. The traitor's flesh began to melt and merge, his agonized screams echoing across the wasteland. Soon, they were nothing but a grotesque mound of fused bodies, a single consciousness trapped in a prison of flesh. I will not bother asking why you sided with the orcs, my father stated, his voice devoid of emotion. He sentenced them to live out the rest of their days in that disgusting form, a fate infinitely more cruel than the death they craved. My attention turned to the vice captain of my knights, her life fading before my eyes. With her dying breath, she pleaded to be allowed to fulfill her duty to the family. Even in death, I knelt and held her, accepting her final request. I understand your will. I promised her that the Jackson family would never forget her devotion. Her gauntlet fell to the ground with a soft thud, and she was gone. My father approached me as I grieved over the body of my loyal soldier. He noted the damage was severe, and I admitted my failure. I have no excuse. I confessed that I drove the Jackson Knights to their deaths and should have withdrawn them. He remained silent for a moment, simply observing. Do not blame yourself too much, he finally said, his tone softening almost imperceptibly. You reminded me that I faced hundreds of orc riders and purifiers, and that no one could have expected me to face them alone. You did your best, he concluded, offering a sliver of comfort I didn't know I needed. I looked at the vice captain's body and channeled my dark energy into her. I told my father that the Jackson Knights wished to fulfill their duty even after death. And the battle is not over yet, I declared, my eyes glowing with purpose. Back at the Red Tower, the man responsible for this tragedy was blissfully unaware. Marquis Eurus, a key conspirator, was entertaining a woman in his private chambers. Did you have a good dream? She asked, cooing at the man she thought was the most handsome in the empire. He poured her a glass of wine, playing the part of the charming nobleman. She flattered him, telling him how lucky she was to be alone with him. Am I that charming? He purred, leaning in closer. I watched from the tray line as the final orc warboss bellowed his defiance, a pointless gesture against the inevitable. He swung his crude axe with the desperation of a dying animal, a wide, clumsy arc of fury. My subordinate, Helmet, barely managed to parry the blow, his expression grim. He muttered about their fierce resistance, even after being nearly wiped out. How utterly tedious. Sir Helmet, please step back, I ordered, my voice cutting through the din of battle. His eyes widened in surprise as he saw me approach, my aura already beginning to warp the air around us. Defeating them is the duty of me and my knights, I declared, and my shadows surged forward at my command. My knights moved as one, their enchanted blades a blur of purple light, carving through the remaining orcs with chilling efficiency. Helmet could only stare in disbelief, wondering how my swordsmanship had reached such a level of control. It was a foolish question. They weren't witnessing my talent, but my absolute will made manifest. The orc warboss, realizing his grunts were no match, let out a roar that pulsed with raw, untamed power. My knights were thrown back, their formation breaking as they cried out that they couldn't hold him. Helmet screamed a warning. Young master, it's dangerous, but I simply waved him off. Do not worry, I said, calmly assessing the brute's power output. It was strong but not enough to be a true threat. However, this was a perfect opportunity for a demonstration. A seductive voice whispered from behind me, shall I help? I felt Lilith's presence coiling around me, but I pushed the thought away. It's not your time to step in yet. Using her power here in front of everyone was too risky. We could easily lose control. She wrapped her arms around me, a pleasant but distracting gesture. Don't worry, I like your world, brother, she purred. I will never do something you dislike, so play with me as much as you like. Tempting, but I had my own power to unleash. I stepped forward alone, my own darkness swirling around me, eclipsing the very light of the forest. The orc warboss charged, thinking a direct assault would work on me. A foolish, predictable move. I activated my skill, and a spear of solid shadow erupted from the ground, impaling the creature's leg. It looked down, its primitive brain struggling to comprehend what had just happened. Before it could even roar in pain, another shadow pierced its arm, forcing it to drop its axe. My knights and Helmet could only gawk as their supposedly unbeatable foe was crippled without me taking a single step. And so the legend grew, the Black Prince of the North, the rightful heir, a monster who commanded the shadows themselves. Back at the Black Tower, my father received the reports. The investigation into the purifiers who attacked me had hit a dead end. Their minds were completely wiped. As expected, he said, his voice betraying no emotion. He knew they had an insider who leaked my movements, a traitor within our own ranks. His aide offered another possibility, a name spoken only in whispers. Monsters of Truth. The aide was suggesting that hardline elders from the Black Tower were colluding with our rivals, the Red Tower. He spoke of the Black-Red Instruction Corps, a dark chapter from the past. An unofficial unit from the Unification War, whose atrocities were so great their very existence was erased. When my father tried to reform the Black Tower, some of these monsters defected, clinging to their path of destruction. It was clear another purge would be necessary to cleanse the rot from our house. My father's silence was more menacing than any threat. Later, I stood with him in his underground workshop. On cold stone slabs lay the bodies of the knights who had died for me. They were knights who trusted and followed me, I said, my voice cold and steady. They stayed by my side and perished, and as their lord I have a duty to repay their wish. I turned to face the most powerful dark mage on the continent. Please teach me how to raise the Death Order. He looked at me, seeing not a grieving boy, but the future of the Black Tower and a path to freedom from his own darkness. Grow up and surpass me, he commanded, and rise to the peak of the Black Tower. This army of darkness will become entirely yours. His words hit me with the force of a physical blow. I understood his meaning instantly. He wanted me to defeat him. Father, I said, my voice ringing with challenge, may I dare request a duel with my teacher here and now? A slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. With what will you decide the match? He asked, as my own dark magic began to leak into the room. I wanted to know what kind of realm the peak he spoke of truly was. Please allow me to fight with my full strength, I requested, and he gave a simple nod. Very well, use all your strength as you wish. With a single incantation, I pulled their souls from the ether. Rise, black swords of Jackson. My father watched, mildly impressed. Your incantation is very clean. He idly stood by as my undead knights charged him. I trapped them in a cage of shadows, a display of my precise control. Their blades stopped just inches from his face. Their movement stopped. He observed, his expression unreadable. He was utterly unimpressed. In a duel between dark mages, he began, his voice echoing with ancient power. His aura flared, and my connection to my knights shattered. Losing control of your creations is more fatal than anything else. He spoke of a fundamental law. Darkness always flows toward what is deeper and thicker. In that case, I would simply have to become the deepest darkness in the room. I focused my will, pouring every ounce of my past life's experience into a single point of concentration. Suddenly, my knights ignored my father and turned, their blades pointed back at me. No, not at me. They bypassed me and charged him again. I watched confused as they sliced through him. Astonishing, his voice echoed from behind me, completely unharmed. I turned to see his head floating beside his body, regarding me with cold amusement. To think you would take back control of the dead from me. How was this possible? He then reminded me of his words from the battlefield. Didn't I tell you that I had not permitted death? It wasn't healing magic. It was reality manipulation, the power to impose one's will upon the very laws of the world. I finally understood the sheer impossible chasm between us. This was a match I could never have won from the start.